Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
When she left me, there was one question I needed an answer to, but she never gave it to me. Instead, she simply said she had to leave. Yet, she also told me that she still loved me. I never got the closure I was hoping for, just her wordless departure and a lingering sense of confusion. That was 5 years ago. Now, she's found me again. By that time, I had completely overhauled my life. I sold my old house, liquidated my business, and moved to another city. I was determined to erase every trace of my former existence, working tirelessly to leave no clue behind. My assets were carefully shielded in a complex web of trusts. The first trust funneled its stipend into an offshore account, which was then passed through another trust, and again repeated once more before the funds finally reached me. It was a maze designed not to hide from the law, but to ensure no one could find me. The only ones who knew every detail were the IRS, though that wasn't the point. I wasn't trying to avoid taxes. I was trying to disappear. She found me anyway. My name is Logan Whitaker, 31 years old, and I'm a day trader by profession. I was fortunate to receive an inheritance from my grandfather upon earning my degree, which allowed me to dive into the world of investing. I kept a portion of the money, about $25,000, for my personal interest in small stock trading. In addition to that, I invested some of the inheritance in blue-chip stocks that provided solid dividends, offering a steady stream of income. But perhaps my most interesting investment was a small business that was struggling financially, a company that produced fasteners. They manufactured all kinds of nuts, bolts, screws, nails, and other hardware. Simple items, yet indispensable, used by people across various industries every single day. I first met Elena Marinos when she was 19, and I was 21. We spent a couple of years dating on and off, a connection that had its ups and downs but was never quite severed. After a while, I finally gathered the courage to ask her if she would marry me. To my surprise, she turned me down, but she wasn't cold about it. Elena told me she loved me, that if I wanted to be exclusive, we could continue in that direction. She even went on to say that, if she ever did marry, it would be to me. However, she made it clear that our physical connection was good and should continue as long as we both were willing. It was a strange declaration, but one that I accepted, not knowing what the future would hold. After roughly 2 years of being together, Elena told me she was planning to go on a family pilgrimage to Greece to connect with some of her extended family. She mentioned that the trip would last between 3 to 5 months. As usual, she expressed her love for me, and in the weeks leading up to her departure, she was determined to make the most of our time together, indulging in a whirlwind of passion, trying to exhaust me with every encounter. She left in late March, and her return was scheduled for no later than mid-August. While she was away, we kept in touch through letters and phone calls, and everything seemed fine at first. But by early July, something changed. All communication from her side stopped without warning. I waited, thinking maybe it was just a temporary lapse, but as the weeks passed, I realized that she wasn't coming back. She never returned to me, and it wasn't until recently that I heard from her again. I was angry, hurt, and confused. About 7 months after the last communication from her, I decided to leave town. I sold my company at a decent profit and moved all of my blue chips into a blind trust. I went to Denver and started over. I swore off women for almost a year and a half. I didn't date. I kept all communications with women to a minimum. I even refused to tell my family my new location. They would tell Elena where I was if she contacted them. I bought a new company, and because of my anger, I hired only men. I was surprised at how many men were looking for office work as a secretary or receptionist. I had a male administrative assistant, and all of my sales staff was male. About 2 years after I moved to Denver, I met a nice woman who seemed to be a little mysterious, and I was intrigued. I dated Alyssa for about 4 months before I realized that there was no real passion there. We parted as semi-friends. I have never been able to be a total friend to someone I dated. I got back in the dating game, and as my business took off, I also hired some women to work for me. It was strictly business. I firmly believed in the Buddhist adage, don't shit in your rice bowl or something like that. I did not dive in the secretarial pool. In spite of my dating, I had not found a woman that set me astir. I was not a monk, but I made sure my partners knew that it was only a friends with benefits type relationship. The ladies that could not accept that never got a second date. While I was walking in City Park on Saturday morning in June a little more than 5 years after Elena left when I heard someone call Logan. No one in Denver knew that nickname. I turned toward the sound and there she was. Elena had come back. I walked over to her, and she reached out like she was going to hug me. I stepped back out of reach. Elena looked confused and hurt. What's wrong? Aren't you glad to see me? Elena, if you were the last woman in this city, I would move away. I was promised by a certain woman that she would come back to me in 4 or 5 months. 3.5 months later, she stopped communicating with me. I was until 5 minutes ago almost over the hurt. Is it still Miss Marino's? Or is it Mrs. Something? I waited for 6 months beyond the time you promised to be back before I gave up and sold my company and moved. My God, I really damaged you, didn't I? I know and knew that you loved me, but I didn't think that you would still be waiting for me after I didn't come back. And it is still Marino's. I have never married. I told you when you asked me that if I married it would be to you. Then why in the hell didn't you contact me with a reason to stop talking? Then why in the hell did you not come back when you promised? Then why in the hell are you here and not out of my miserable life? She started to sob. I didn't just hurt you, did I? I destroyed you. I'm so sorry. Listen up, bitch. You did destroy me. I have had dated exactly 5 women in 5 years, and most were all in the last 6 months. Please, for God's sake, get out of my life. You have damaged me very deeply. Then she started crying. I turned around and walked away. Well, that little tirade didn't work. Elena was at the office door before we opened. I was always the first one in, so when I refused to go near her, my staff was standing outside waiting for me to open the doors. I went in the back and walked to the front door. I pushed the panic bar from inside. After everyone was inside, I blocked the entrance and let the door close without unlocking it. That didn't work. She called my secretary and made an appointment. When my guy told me of the appointment, I informed him that if he did not cancel it, he would be looking for another job. He canceled. That didn't work either. Elena showed up at my house. In the morning, Elena was parked in the street across from the gate to the community. Security wouldn't let just anybody in and visitors had to be cleared and announced. Elena wanted neither action to occur. I ignored her. I drove to the diner where I eat every morning and asked for my usual breakfast to go. Elena came just as I was paying. If I see your face within 1,000 feet of me, I will swear out a stalking complaint against you. Do I make myself clear? She just nodded and left. That didn't work either. She somehow got a job with one of my best customers, and he insisted that I come to a welcome to the company family dinner. I walked in and Elena was smirking. I called my customer over and told him he needed to find another source for his supplies because I would not deal with his new employee. I left before dinner. The next day, I called a meeting of my senior staff. When they were all assembled, I started. I am going to sell the business. I have a major personal issue that I can't solve here. I will entertain a buyout from one or any combination of all of you. I will take 45% of last year's after-tax profit. I will also entertain ideas on how I can keep the business but not be here for the day-to-day stuff. Either way, I am leaving Denver in no more than 6 weeks. Well, that silenced the peanut gallery. For about 5 minutes, there was a lot of whispered conversation. Finally, my head accountant spoke up. Martin said, "Why don't you take the company public and make it a corporation? That way you could retain the majority of voting stock and be chairman and appoint a COO. You know, I hadn't thought of that. I will talk to my broker today. Thanks. I want all of you to know that regardless of how this comes out, you will all keep your jobs. I will make that part of any sales agreement, and if I find I can take the company public, you will all have stock issued to you." I called my broker, and he was very enthusiastic about his firm underwriting an IPO for my company. It seems my little company was getting a regional reputation. He did say that I would need to have a comprehensive audit done, as well as an evaluation of the company. He gave me the names of several firms that did that kind of business. A couple of them were in the city. I wanted more than one appraisal in case there was a big discrepancy between them. After I made arrangements with the 2 local companies, and one from Lansing, Michigan, I told my executive assistant that I would not be in to work the rest of the week, and he was to only call me if the building was on fire or collapsed. He laughed and said he could handle it. I spent that week talking to real estate agents looking for a temporary lease until the mess with Elena settled out. I also listed my house with an agent. Within 4 days, I had a bidding war between 2 buyers. I asked the agent to let me interview the buyers. I was told that was against the ethics of the local real estate board and probably against the law. So, I asked the agent to describe the buyers. Buyer 1 was a young couple that had come into a small inheritance and wanted to buy a house and get out of apartment living. They had the lowest offer, full asking price, and they would pay for all closing costs and inspections. Buyer 2 was a young single Greek woman. As soon as she said Greek, I guessed it was Elena, who was offering a 7% premium over asking, closing, inspections, and realtor's commission. Her offer was totaled out at 15% over asking. I countered the couple with the house and contents except my personal things, cooking utensils, china, and silverware. I also agreed to pay the inspections and split closing costs. Of course they accepted. The agent was not happy. I pointed out that she had the couple's offer for a couple of days before the other one came in, and if she tried to stop my acceptance, I would sue her for her real estate license. The law stated that you could not refuse an offer of full price unless the buyer was not solvent enough to fulfill the terms. After the offer was accepted, I was called by Elena and she started screaming. I had had enough. I contacted my lawyer and asked him to petition the court for a restraining order on Elena. He said he would get right on it. The next week, the three companies were coming in on separate days to do some of their due diligence. One was coming Monday, another Tuesday, and the one from Lansing on Thursday. I was busy the rest of the time. I was mending the fence with the customer I dumped. I even offered an extra 2% below catalog for 6 months. He asked what set me off. I told him of Elena's ambush. He laughed and said that as soon as I walked out, she quit. The rest of the week was meeting with the brokers and the underwriting people. It turned out my little company had goodwill worth a lot. We were also competitive with foreign suppliers, so with our quick shipping time and Made in America labels, we were fast becoming a smaller but significant national player. While all this was going on, Elena was not silent nor was she passive. I received an offer for 45% of my company from a Greek consortium. My lawyer told me the price was what I had valued the whole company at, but the offer had a gotcha clause. The buyer insisted that I remain in charge and that a person of their choice was to be given a position equal to my 2 executive vice presidents. I smelled a rat, and not a 4-legged one. I told the lawyer my plans for going public and that I was refusing all offers until I see what the market looked like. She also continued to call my cell phone. I solved the problem by going to my provider and getting a new number. Then when the cell phone didn't work, she must have hired an investigator to keep her posted on my whereabouts when I wasn't at work. She showed up at any restaurant I went to and made sure I saw her. She even managed to find out my new address. Once she was served with the restraining order, all that stopped. The investigator was fired. The calls stopped, and she stopped sitting in the lobby of the apartment building I was staying in. One thing I forgot was to have the order include written correspondence. She sent me a letter. Logan, I am writing to say again how sorry I am. I was wrong to not tell that the trip was to get me married to a son of a family business partner. I did not know it when I went, and once we were in Greece, my father took my passport. The guy I was supposed to get married to was not a nice person. He was spoiled, arrogant, and turned out to be gay. I did not marry him. I was not allowed to call you after that last call I made, and all of the servants were warned that if I mailed a letter with their help, they would be fired. I also have an aunt who was my chaperone and keeper. I was not allowed to go anywhere by myself. I finally retrieved my passport about 6 months before I saw you in the park. I escaped and went to the American embassy and asked to have them arrange for me to get home. When I got back to the U.S., you had left, and no one knew where you went. You even managed to hide your financial footprint from my investigators. I finally discovered your phone number, and the investigators ran down the company address. That was not enough, as you were not listed anywhere in the company records. It took a while to realize that your trust owned the company, and those records only led to another trust. I went back to the investigators, and finally they followed you and got your home address. I took the first flight to here to find you. I guess you did all right for yourself because your gated community security people were very loyal. I watched you for a couple of weeks and saw that you often walked in the park, so I ambushed you there. I am so sorry for what happened to you. I loved you and I still do. I want to be with you. Please at least let me talk to you for a half hour. Elena. I didn't know if she was lying or embellishing, but I did remember that her father had always acted like he hated me, so he may have hatched that plot. I decided to do something that I had heard about and might give me some answers. I hired a back-dated clipping research firm to find any mention of Elena in the European newspapers. I also had some federal contacts, and I got the number of the American embassy in Athens. I called and they told me that they had no record of Elena asking for emergency transport to the U.S. The clipping service came up with pages and pages of pictures and clippings of Elena partying in Monaco, Nice, Paris, Rome, and London over a 4.5-year period. She was always in the company of a son of a prominent Greek politician. His name was Lucian Vaughn. One of the photos from about the 3rd year she was gone showed Elena looking about 8 months pregnant. So much for a chaperone and keeper. I decided to get a little extra payback. I had copies made of all of the pictures and included them with a response letter. Elena, your keeper is very handsome. I didn't know you were related to the Vaughn family. Lucian is a funny name for an aunt. I hope your baby has a father. By now you must realize the damage you have done. Not only did to break off communication, but when you came back you stalked, cheated, and lied to me. I am having the restraining order amended to include written or internet communication. I loved you, and you destroyed that love. I want nothing to do with you. There will be no meeting. I do have one question. If you decided to find a new plaything in Europe, why didn't you come out and tell me when you did? As you can see from the dates on the newspapers, you were only gone 3 weeks when you first went out in public with Lucian. Again, I loved you, but you trashed that love and destroyed my trust in women for a long time. Logan. I sent the letter with having a signature required. I sent it to the address Elena had put on her letter. The events didn't unfold as I had imagined. The day I received the signature card from the letter, the paper ran a story about a fatal car crash. The driver, fleeing from the police after they attempted to stop her for speeding, collided with a bridge abutment at a very high speed. It was Elena. According to the paper, she intentionally drove into the abutment. I went into a funk because I really did love Elena, and all of the lies and the desertion had profoundly hurt me. I was in a daze for a couple of weeks when business reared its head, and I had to slap myself to become clear-headed. Then the IPO sort of bogged down. The broker and the underwriting company thought that timing was important. It was 2 months after I had talked to the broker and another 10 weeks after I told the employees 6 weeks. About 4 months after all of that died down. And after the successful IPO, I got an offer for my shares of the company at a premium of 25% over their end-of-day trading price, which was at least as much as what I was willing to sell the company to the employees. It was a big premium over what I had paid to buy the company. The offer came from Elena's family. I thought it over, and as Elena was gone, and I liked Denver very much, I decided to stay, but I also was not enthused about going back to the factory. Then when I decided to sell to Elena's family, there seemed to be some conditions added. The first condition was that I had to retain 10% of the stock. The second condition was that I was to remain as chairman of the board and vote the Marinos family shares. The third condition was that I needed to talk to the family. I decided that they deserved to see me if for no other reason than to have some closure. I signed the offer sheet papers and bought a house about 4 doors away from where I had lived. I met the family at the official signing of the sales agreement. Elena's mother Helena was still in semi-shock over her death, but hugged me and told me that I had been good for Elena and that the trip to Greece was a huge mistake. Elena's father, Antonios, shook my hand, and they both asked for a half an hour after the business meeting. I agreed. The meeting was an eye-opener. Mother and father were there, but so was grandson Logan Antonios Marinos, Elena's son. With him and taking care of him was a nanny named Callista Vaughn. She was Lucian, cousin, and as we talked, I found out she was on the outs with her Greek relatives. One thing that surprised me was the hostility I had felt from Antonios, Elena's father, was gone. And he explained that he realized that Elena had lied to me about Lucian. He felt that she was not an honorable person and had disgraced the family name. The gist of the discussion was that the trip was pushed by Lucian and that Elena was in favor of going. She was dating Lucian when she told me it was a family trip. She thought she could go to Europe and just put me out of her life, but Lucian turned out to be a serial cheater, and when the baby was born, he disappeared. Because of the scandal of Lucian taking a powder, his family paid a huge amount of what Antonios called hush money and sent Callista to Elena and more money to their family. They used that money to buy my shares. Mother and dad were going back to Greece, but the baby was an American citizen, and Callista was a permanent resident alien, working toward her citizenship. They asked that I be her sponsor as she would be in great danger in Greece, and there was no one in America they trusted more, to be fair. The kicker was they named me conservator of the company shares. They had put them in Logan's name. I looked at the child and I was lost. He had done nothing wrong, and I felt I would be a good guardian. I agreed to everything. Callista had an apartment just about a quarter mile from the community I lived in. She was a frequent visitor to my house. About 6 months after meeting her, we were dating. She was about 8 years younger than me, but told me that difference was not unusual for Greek couples. Logan and Callista, I called her Callie, became a big part of my healing, and a year after we started dating, I asked Callie to marry me. She said yes. We married and raised Logan as our own. We even went so far as to adopt him. As he grew, we added 2 wonderful sisters for him. When he was 5, Callista Athena was born, and 2 years later Galeen Athena arrived. I would like to say my brilliant business tactics made us tons of money, but I was very conservative with Logan's shares and their worth. The company grew, but only in a natural progression, and when he takes over the shares when he turns 25, he will be a wealthy young man, but not one of the super rich like his late father. Yes, it seems a certain Lucian Vaughn's body was found about a year after the family meeting. It appeared to the Greek police that it was a revenge murder, but they never discovered the perpetrators. I received a copy of the newspaper report from an anonymous source about 6 weeks after the discovery. Life is an adventure, and the road is almost never straight. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Hello? I'm in my late 30s. I've always had girlfriends, but never felt confident enough to get married. So I've been living single. I majored in Chinese and lived in China for over 5 years. At the request of an acquaintance last summer, I started tutoring a first grader named Oliver in Chinese. Oliver, having graduated from an English kindergarten, speaks English well, but was also eager to learn Chinese. So I was introduced by a mutual friend to tutor him. I happily agreed to also help him prepare for Chinese proficiency exams. Oliver's family home was quite spacious and well organized. When I first met Oliver's mother, I was struck by her beauty. She looked like she was in her mid-20s, though she said she was in her early 30s, having married right after college. She was slim and tall, easily over 5'7". Oliver, taking after his mother, was a handsome boy with distinct features. He was a bright child, understanding more than what was taught, doing his homework well and having good pronunciation. He has a 3-year-old sister who was incredibly cute. I heard Oliver's grandmother lived in the same apartment complex and would often come over to look after her grandchildren. I had the chance to meet her during my first lesson. Oliver's mother mentioned she needed to go to a community center for her daughter's class, so she asked her mother to stay with Oliver during our Chinese lessons. Oliver's grandmother, also quite beautiful, seemed to have passed down her looks. She mentioned she was preparing to become a senior model and needed to practice for interviews in English and Chinese. After Oliver's lesson, she expressed a desire to have private lessons at her place on a different day, since she needed to look after her granddaughter. I informed her of my availability, and we agreed on weekly lessons every Friday afternoon at her home. Despite offering a family discount, she insisted on paying the full price, mentioning she heard her grandson was enjoying the lessons and learning well. She humbly asked for patience as she might learn slower due to her age. I learned she was in her mid-50s, but she was very motivated and had surprisingly good pronunciation, and it was lovely to see her practice consistently. She mentioned she had a lot to do besides foreign language interviews. For starters, she takes care of her appearance and gets treatments at a local skincare clinic. She also makes it a point to shower at home and apply a facial mask every day. She offered to help me with a mask after class when we had a moment, and I agreed. You just have to sit in a chair and apply it, but lying down on the couch and relaxing for 20 minutes works too, she said. Having only ever used lotion my whole life, that day was my first time trying a face mask. I didn't like the cold feeling of the mask sheet on my face, but after washing it off, my skin tone seemed noticeably brighter. Having a job that requires a lot of talking, my throat often feels scratchy, and I need to present a clean appearance to my students. Realizing I hadn't been taking care of my skin made me think I should start. None of my past girlfriends ever paid attention to my skin, but I found Oliver's grandmother to be quite thoughtful. One day after class, she showed me a home workout channel on YouTube. The exercises looked easy to follow at a glance. "Would you like to try it?" she asked. So we turned on the smart TV in the living room and started exercising. It looked easy, but I was sweating profusely after a while. As I was fanning myself, she said, "I'm sweating too, so I'm going to take a quick shower. You should take one too," and went to the bedroom. I never imagined what would happen next when we exercised. I noticed her body didn't have an ounce of fat. Impressive for someone in her 50s. The bathroom had a pleasantly scented soap, not some cheap supermarket brand, but a pretty natural soap. After lightly washing up and changing clothes, she came out in a cute home dress. Honestly, I was a bit smitten. It was my first time feeling this way about an older woman. Thanks to Oliver's grandmother, I got to do a face mask and exercise. It was so much fun, I said as I was leaving. She looked at me and said, "If you have time, let's have a beer." I was planning to have a beer at home anyway, so it worked out well, and I sat down on the couch. She brought out homemade sweet potato chips and stout. I've been having so much fun preparing to be a senior model. I've always exercised and taken care of my skin, but studying with you has been such a joy, she said. Her mood turned somber as she recalled her late husband. She mentioned that Oliver's mom passed away from a terrible illness within 2 months of getting sick while she was in college. The thought of living without her husband was daunting, but she smiled and said that those who are left behind must go on living. She moved closer to her daughter to alleviate her loneliness by spending time with her grandchildren. She also mentioned that becoming a senior model was her son-in-law's suggestion, noting that she hadn't seen anyone her age with such good skin and youthful appearance. I cautiously asked if she still felt lonely without her husband. She admitted that while being busy with her grandchildren keeps her mind off her late husband, she feels truly alone when she returns home. She expressed skepticism about the men others have tried to introduce to her, wishing for someone cultured like me. Our connection was undeniable, and by the next morning, I had come to my senses. Unable to wait for our next lesson, I found myself at her house late at night. I'm unsure if it's appropriate to continue this relationship with my student. She's been widowed for over 10 years and hinted at the difficulty of those years, making it hard for me to leave her alone.
I am a rural fellow named Bill Carlson. Holding an associate degree in animal husbandry, my lifelong ambition has been to possess my own feed store and raise a family. Upon completing junior college, I wedded my high school sweetheart, Janice, with whom I grew up and envisioned a future. She was the only girl I ever saw myself living with, a lovely brunette with a pleasing physique that endured despite bearing 2 boys. I took immense pride in her as my wife and was prepared to do anything for her. However, Janice had one issue. She envied those who lived luxuriously. She avidly read society pages and subscribed to magazines featuring glamorous individuals. Even at the dentist's office, she pored over automobile magazines, becoming well-versed in fancy cars and designer clothing lines. She aspired for more, a desire I couldn't fulfill. I secured employment at an upscale feed store in Omaha, catering to the yuppie clientele, allowing us to be nearer to the urban center while pursuing my passion. I enjoyed my work and excelled at it, providing customers with personalized service, which the company acknowledged by granting me flexible hours. Janice initially relished city life over rural living and seemed content. However, when she chose to enter the workforce, we had to resort to daycare for the kids, who didn't seem to mind. Janice landed a position at Gilbert Medical, a medical equipment firm, which she seemed to enjoy as it provided her with the opportunity to dress up and interact with non-farmers. As her career blossomed, her interest in our home life waned, leaving me to handle the majority of childcare duties, from daycare drop-offs to meal preparation and housekeeping, while she focused on laundry, ensuring her clothing remained impeccably ironed. We diligently set aside money each month with the goal of eventually purchasing my own feed store. However, despite both of us working, our savings dwindled. Daycare expenses accounted for some, but the bulk disappeared on beauty treatments, nail salon visits, and expensive clothing purchases. I struggled to comprehend how our dual incomes resulted in diminished savings. Janice refused to address the issue, growing defensive and upset whenever I broached it, so I ceased mentioning it altogether. Nonetheless, I discreetly opened another savings account to keep separate. Meanwhile, Janice began working overtime, engaging in private phone calls, becoming less attentive in our bed life, and expressing desires for a newer, fancier car, and even contemplating chest implants. It left me with no doubt that she was having an affair. Though I'm just a simple guy from the countryside, I'm not naive. Right now, I wasn't interested in salvaging the marriage. I simply wanted to sort things out and move forward before it was too late. Since I didn't socialize with her coworkers, it was tough to pinpoint anything, but I suspected if there was anything going on, it was at her workplace. I had a couple of good buddies at work, not highly educated, but hard workers. Even though I was their boss, I didn't pull rank. The tasks got done without needing to micromanage. We all understood our roles and collaborated well, which fostered a positive relationship. Roy and Freddie would be important allies in my scheme. I noticed that on Wednesdays, Janice would dress up in fancy clothes and linger longer before heading to work. I thought this would be an opportune time to investigate. I briefed the guys on the situation, and they covered for me with my duties. That day, I parked near the entrance of the Gilbert Medical Plant lot, using the time to catch up on technical reading. Around 11 a.m., Janice left and drove to the Holiday Inn lot, parking far from her office. Shortly after, a guy arrived in a red Corvette and parked at the opposite end. Though I didn't recognize him, when he stepped out, Janice followed suit, and they entered a first-floor room, number 117, using his key. My heart sank, and I felt queasy. My suspicions were confirmed. Unsure of my next move, I decided to head back to work, taking my time to plan. Before leaving, I snipped 2 of Janice's valve stems with my wire cutters out of frustration. I'm not sure why I didn't target his. The rest of the day dragged on, and I went through the motions of picking up the kids, preparing dinner, and asking Janice about her day, to which she mentioned a flat tire. One of my coworkers changed it for her, and the incident was never discussed again. The following morning, after dropping the boys off at daycare, I swung by the plant. It didn't take long to spot the red Corvette, which conveniently had a reserved parking spot with a sign. I noted the name, Ken Beecham, distribution manager, whose wife also worked at Gilbert. By that afternoon, I had gathered plenty of information about Ken, including his marital status, past issues at work, and personal details. Although I had his contact info and even his SSN, I wasn't sure how to proceed. He'd been married to Amy for 8 years. We completed a productive day's work, and Roy, Freddie, and I managed to squeeze in 1 beer before I had to pick up the kids. Though uncertain about my next move, I had a feeling things would fall into place soon. Despite trying to maintain a calm and logical approach, my frustration grew daily, and occasional silent tears betrayed my inner turmoil. Feeling wounded and unable to mend myself, living with Janice became increasingly unbearable. I longed for it to be over. The following day, luck smiled on me again when I recalled that Marge Gilbert, one of my loyal customers, was married to the president of the Gilbert Medical Company. Though I hadn't met him, Marge and I had a great rapport. I made a conscious effort to be extra friendly with Marge, exploring if our connection could be advantageous. During Marge's visit with her daughter, Cindy, a vet school student, we conversed for about an hour. Enjoying our interaction, I felt a twinge of guilt after she left, but it quickly passed. Over the weekend, I spent time in the garage welding. I fashioned a small piece of flat steel with 4 sharp concrete nail points attached, my initial step toward seeking revenge through annoyance. On Tuesday, while unloading an order, I appeared more subdued than usual, catching Marge's attention. She noticed my demeanor and asked what was wrong that day, expressing concern. I responded, explaining that I was dealing with some personal issues, apologizing for not being my usual self. Sensing my distress, Marge suggested we have coffee and a chat. As we sat in her kitchen, reminiscent of a magazine spread with its stainless steel and granite decor, I couldn't help but think of how Janice would admire it. Marge placed the coffee on the table and leaned in, asking how she could help me. Reluctant to burden her with my problems, I eventually opened up, realizing it might offer some relief. I confessed that I believed my wife, Janice, was being coerced into a lovemaking relationship with one of her superiors at Gilbert Medical, though I lacked evidence. Marge inquired about the basis of my suspicion, prompting me to explain the small signs I had noticed, including finding them both together at the Holiday Inn the previous week. I admitted that Janice was unaware of my knowledge and that I was unsure how to approach the topic, expressing concern about whether she felt obligated or if it was her choice. I also shared that our family life had deteriorated, with Janice seeming indifferent toward the children and me, and that she was keeping it hidden, which bothered me. Marge asked about the individual involved, and I mentioned that I suspected his name was Ken Beecham, but was unsure of Janice's relationship with him or if they worked in different parts of the plant. I confessed that I had never met him. Marge offered to investigate discreetly, and after a moment of contemplation, I agreed, expressing a preference to avoid causing a scene. She assured me she would look into it and mentioned seeing me next Thursday for the oat delivery. I thanked her, and as I prepared to leave, suggested bringing the boys over so Cindy could meet them. Reflecting on the conversation, I felt the outcome exceeded my expectations. I was confident Janice wouldn't object to me taking the boys out, envisioning a good weekend ahead. The next morning, as rain poured, Janice carefully dressed for her day. I observed silently as I dropped the kids off at daycare before stopping by work, where the guys were ready to cover my morning shifts. Roy would use my truck for deliveries and log entries, which I would review later. Freddie brought his cousin's van, and we loaded a floor jack equipped with my steel plate. After ensuring all trucks were loaded, I departed for the Holiday Inn right on time. Janice parked in her usual spot, followed by Ken. Once they entered the room, I waited for about 10 minutes. In the pouring rain, I retrieved the jack from the van and approached Ken's car. I positioned the jack under his engine block, swiftly lifting it and puncturing the oil pan with nails. Moving to the Corvette, I repeated the process on its fuel tank. Oil and gas spilled out as I returned the jack to the van. The entire operation took less than a minute. I then disabled Janice's car once more before driving away. In my rearview mirror, I witnessed the explosion from Ken's car. As I left the lot, a sense of relief washed over me. Janice arrived home from work a bit late. Without eating supper, she headed straight to bed. I spent some time with the boys, giving them a bath and tucking them in. That night, I slept on the couch. The following morning, Janice remained in bed while I got the boys ready for daycare. We had breakfast and left, but she stayed in bed without a word, and her car was absent from the driveway. Around 9 a.m., after loading all the trucks, Lieutenant John Fritz paid me a visit. He was amiable. He inquired about my work schedule from the previous day, to which I explained it consisted of routine deliveries. I then asked if he needed verification of my whereabouts. Mentioning he obtained the delivery logs from the previous day around noon, I showed him the logs detailing each stop. He smiled and chuckled lightly, commenting on the meticulous log and asking if I maintained it daily. I offered to show logs from the past month, but he declined with a shake of his head, still smiling. Despite his demeanor, I couldn't discern whether it was positive or negative. I inquired about the reason for his visit, and after some hesitation, he explained they were investigating a car damaged at the Holiday Inn. I questioned why he involved me, and he explained my wife's car, parked nearby, had 2 valve stems cut, leading them to wonder if it was related to the incident. Expressing unawareness of why my wife's car was at the Holiday Inn, I asked about her connection to the damaged car, which he clarified belonged to a colleague she had a lunch meeting with at the hotel. When I asked if he spoke with the people they dined with, he admitted they couldn't recall their names. Pressing for a straightforward conversation, he leaned back, smiling, and mentioned someone named Ken Beecham. I affirmed that I had never met him. He seemed to believe me, expressing a preference not to get involved in domestic matters. Offering his card, he suggested I contact him if needed, and apologized for bringing the issue to my attention. As he left, I muttered about the lack of substantial information provided and the need to connect the dots. After work, upon returning home with the kids, Janice's car was in the driveway. She was casually dressed and had prepared supper, claiming she felt unwell and had called in sick. She didn't mention the previous day's events, so I didn't broach the subject. She retired early, and once again, I took care of the boys and slept on the couch. The following day, She was up and preparing for work when I left with the boys for daycare. After dropping them off, I visited the doctor's office and requested an STD check. Work proceeded as usual for a Friday. Upon returning home, Janice was there once again. After dinner, I informed her that I planned to take the boys to spend the next day at one of my customers' farms. I offered her the chance to join us, fully aware she'd find an excuse to decline. She mentioned some shopping she wanted to do, and I didn't press further. Whether it was shopping or a date, the outcome remained the same. Saturday at Gilbert's Ranch with Cindy and the boys was fantastic. We enjoyed the entire day together, with Marge preparing a wonderful lunch for everyone. I wished the day wouldn't end. Cindy bonded well with the boys, and they seemed to adore her. Unfortunately, Mr. Gilbert wasn't present, so I still didn't get to meet him. Marge didn't bring up our previous conversation, and it seemed Cindy was oblivious to it. Reluctantly, we had to head home. Janice showed no interest in our day when we returned. The boys attempted to share their adventures with her, but she disregarded them. Eventually, they gave up. She did inquire why I wasn't sleeping in the bed anymore. I explained that work-related stress caused me to toss and turn, and I didn't want to disturb her sleep. That was the last she mentioned it. The following week proceeded without incident. I noticed on her special day that she made no special preparations, leading me to assume the rendezvous for the day was canceled. This suited me fine, as I had plenty of work to catch up on. I visited a divorce lawyer I had heard about, receiving informational handouts and brochures, including fill-in-the-blank forms that caught my interest. Everything returned to normal until the following Wednesday. She began the day with a morning shower, carefully styling her hair. She wore new black lingerie, a new perfume, and what seemed to be new shoes. I made sure she didn't catch me observing, and I hurried out with the boys. I was certain this was a date. After dropping off the boys, I swung by the plant and checked his parking spot. A new Porsche Boxster occupied his slot. I noted down the license number and hastened back to work. The guys shared my excitement about the new development. We rushed through the morning deliveries and manipulated the logs once more. I'm sure John Fritz could see through our charade, but we proceeded nonetheless. We enjoyed an extended lunch break. While Roy continued with the deliveries, Freddie picked up 2 large bottles of hydrochloric acid from the swimming pool supply store. I intended to spend lunch with John Fritz. He gave me a peculiar look when I entered his office with pulled pork sandwiches, fries, and a couple of Cokes. I greeted him and sat down across from him. He sensed something was amiss and grinned broadly. I suggested we grab lunch together and catch up on the car damage case, hoping to keep him occupied for about 2 hours. It was going to be a lengthy lunch. While I kept up a friendly demeanor, Freddie was at the Holiday Inn parking lot. He located the Boxer and meticulously poured acid over the trunk, fenders, and deck. He sliced the convertible top and poured acid over the leather seats and floor mats. The dashboard received its share of acid as well. As an extra measure, he deposited a box of mothballs in the gas tank. The nap, however, would wreak havoc on the engine if anyone attempted to start it. The remaining acid was spread across the top of the tires. Before leaving, he once again snipped the valve stems on Janice's car. It all transpired within 15 minutes. The only downside was not knowing how long they would be in the room. John and I engaged in light conversation for a while, until he asked what I was up to. I casually mentioned ensuring I had a solid alibi in case something happened to Ken Beecham's car that day. When John asked why that day was special, I joked about the pulled pork sandwiches being on special. After that, I called the daycare center and asked Carol to arrange for Janice to pick up the boys, explaining that I would be busy at work that afternoon. John chuckled about the delicious pork sandwiches. After a pause, John asked if he should call Mr. Beecham and inquire about his car. I questioned why he would want to do that, and provided him with Mr. Beecham's cell number and the number of the Holiday Inn room 117. John put the phone on speaker and dialed the hotel number. After a few rings, Ken Beecham answered, breathing heavily. Detective Fritz informed him that they still had no leads on who damaged his car and inquired about his new car's whereabouts. Ken seemed surprised by the call and questioned how Detective Fritz got his number. After a brief exchange, Ken mentioned his new car was in the parking lot, and Detective Fritz heard strange noises in the background. Ken abruptly ended the call, stating he needed to get dressed and check something. John grinned at me, asking if I was satisfied. After our conversation, I returned to work. Roy had the logs in perfect condition, and Freddie had discreetly disposed of the acid bottles. That evening at home, Janice picked up the boys but remained silent, going to bed early once more. The following day, John visited me and detailed all the damage to the car, explaining that Ken's insurance was pending since the Corvette incident. The car was totaled, leaving him over $60,000 in debt. Ken insisted I was involved, despite John confirming I was with him at the time. While John naturally suspected my involvement, he couldn't prove anything, nor did he seem inclined to. As for how Janice got her tires fixed, I never inquired, and no one offered any information. Since Janice hadn't come clean about the situation, I decided it was time to put an end to it all. My STD test results came back negative. I had filled out the paperwork for the lawyer to initiate the divorce proceedings. I planned to visit the Gilberts' ranch with the boys this weekend, just in case Cindy was there. If not, we'd spend the day with Marge. The only loose end was lacking evidence of the extramarital affair. The weekend was pleasant. Cindy was present, much to the kids' delight, and we all enjoyed ourselves once more. We felt like a family again, and I missed that, as did the boys. Cindy remained unaware of the situation, but at least she didn't inquire. Before I departed, Marge reassured me with a wink, saying everything would be all right. I was offered a new position about 100 miles away, offering more pay, a better job, and the option to buy into the business in a few years. It seemed perfect, except for the fact that we wouldn't be near Cindy. The following Wednesday, Janice dressed up again. I wasn't sure what kind of car her boyfriend used, but she was clearly preparing for another rendezvous with him. I assumed they were still meeting at the same place. I knew I had to take action, but I hadn't formulated a plan yet. The guys and I were brainstorming when Marge Gilbert pulled up. She signaled for me to approach and silently drove us to the plant. Parking in the back, we entered through a private entrance straight to Mr. Gilbert's office. Marge facilitated introductions, and his secretary brought us coffee. We engaged in small talk for a while, until I finally asked, "Did you bring me here for a reason?" Mr. Gilbert chuckled and mentioned it was time to resolve the situation. He informed me that Marge had briefed him on what was happening, and they had conducted an internal investigation. He assured me that by the end of the day, I would have all the necessary information. He apologized in advance if anything he did cause me damage. We engaged in more conversation, and Marge noticed my grin when Cindy was mentioned. I attempted to conceal it, but did a poor job. Suddenly, the phone rang, catching everyone's attention. Mr. Gilbert received an update and confirmed that everything was set. He explained that Ken and my wife were in their usual room at the Holiday Inn. Ken had driven a company vehicle there, which violated policy, so it was being brought back to the plant. Unfortunately, my wife's car had a couple of flat tires, which seemed to be a recurring occurrence. He then put the phone on speaker and dialed the room. Mr. Gilbert called Ken and informed him of the urgent need to discuss something. Ken seemed surprised and asked what the matter was and how Mr. Gilbert got his number. Mr. Gilbert brushed off the question and explained that the legal department had been alerted to a potential lovemaking annoyance situation. He asked if there was a female employee from their company with Ken. After a moment of silence and indistinct background chatter, Ken confirmed that she was there. Mr. Gilbert asked if she was there willingly or if she was being coerced or threatened. Ken assured him that she was there of her own accord and that the relationship was consensual. Mr. Gilbert expressed appreciation for Ken's honesty on the sensitive issue and stated that they would prepare a statement to confirm the consensual nature of the relationship. He then requested to speak with the young lady. After some background noise, Janice came on the line and asked how she could assist him. Mr. Gilbert asked if Ken coerced or threatened her to accompany him there. Janice confirmed to Mr. Gilbert that Ken hadn't threatened her, and the relationship was consensual. Mr. Gilbert expressed relief and informed them that when they returned to the plant, the statements would be ready for them to sign. He asked to speak with Ken again. Upon Ken's return to the phone, Mr. Gilbert instructed him to come back to the plant for signing papers in the legal department. After hanging up, Mr. Gilbert suggested to Marge that she take me out for lunch and return in a couple of hours once the legal team had finished their work. We enjoyed a fantastic lunch, and although I wanted to express my gratitude, I refrained from doing so. Eventually, Marge convinced me not to discuss the matter or what was done ever again. She also made me promise not to mention anything to Cindy. That was a positive sign. I informed Marge about my new job offer, and she was happy for me and the boys. After lunch, we went back to the plant, where I obtained notarized copies of Ken and Janice's statements. Both confirmed they had engaged in consensual closeness outside their marriage. The legal team assured me this would be sufficient for my lawyer to proceed with the divorce. Ken and Janice were terminated from their positions. Their belongings were packed before their arrival, and they were escorted out of the building. Unfortunately, neither of them had a car. Marge provided me with her card to use temporarily, and I promised to return it the following day. I dropped off the documents at the lawyer's office. She made multiple copies of each, which I intended to send to Ken's wife. I closed our bank accounts, paid off and canceled all credit cards, and arranged for the utilities to be disconnected. On Friday afternoon, I visited John Fritz and assured him I had behaved. He chuckled and mentioned that he had informed the landlord about not renewing the lease next month. Additionally, he had given notice at work, noting that they were supportive but disappointed about his departure. Freddie accompanied me to the Gilbert Ranch with my truck so I could return Marge's car. It was time to pick up the boys and head home. I dreaded walking through the door. Janice's car wasn't in the driveway. When we entered, she was sitting on the couch crying. This was the first time she had shown any emotion at all. 2 file boxes containing her personal belongings from work were nearby. I fed the boys and put on the TV for them. I stood by her, giving her an opportunity to speak if she wanted. She expressed her frustration, stating that I had to interfere and ruin everything in her life. She questioned why I couldn't mind my own business and accused me of not having the right to interfere with hers. I was astonished that she still viewed the situation as solely concerning her, showing no concern for the children or me, nor considering Ken's wife, Amy. Our family, our life, and our plans meant nothing to her. Her only focus was her own actions at that moment. I felt relieved that I wouldn't spend the rest of my life with her. Without a word, I went upstairs and took a shower. Later, while getting the boys ready for bed, she retreated to the bedroom and shut the door. The next day, I took the boys with me to work, ensuring there were no loose ends and that Roy and Freddie could manage the system I'd established. We gathered boxes from stores for the move. Passing by the Holiday Inn, I noticed Janice's car was gone, presumably repaired by now. Fixing the flat tires likely took a toll on her shopping budget for the past month. Janice wasn't home when we returned. We only took clothes and toys, leaving everything else for her to dispose of. She didn't know that by the next day, all the utilities would be shut off. Damn, I was ruthless. As we backed out of the driveway, Janice pulled in. She stood by her car, watching us drive away. I took the boys to Chuck E. Cheese and stayed at a motel overnight. The next morning, I dropped them off at daycare. I gave Carol cookies and party favors, explaining it was their last day, and I wanted them to enjoy it with their friends. Before leaving, she pulled me aside and asked about my wife's behavior the previous week. She explained that she didn't want to pry, but since I was leaving, she was curious. She mentioned that my wife seemed furious when she called, demanding to know where she got the number. When she mentioned that I gave it to her, my wife started cursing. Although my wife didn't say anything when she picked up the children, she could tell she was really angry. She apologized for involving Carol, admitting she set her up. She revealed that Janice was having an affair and was at the Holiday Inn with her boyfriend. She hoped that by Carol calling and interrupting their party, Janice would reconsider, but it didn't work, and Janice got mad at both of them. She mentioned that she would be serving Janice with divorce papers that afternoon and would be leaving with the boys for a new job right after picking them up. She acknowledged it was a low blow on her part and apologized for involving Carol. Later, I went to see my divorce lawyer, who had everything ready. I would have custody of the kids, and Janice could have visitation rights whenever she wanted. This arrangement was fine with me, as I didn't think she would be interested in them anyhow. Everything else was split 50-50, but there wasn't much to divide. There was no alimony, child support, or cash settlements. I left her all the furniture, appliances, and household items. I really didn't want them. She kept her car, which I didn't want because it kept getting flat tires. All I had to do was give the papers to Janice. Unless she contested it, everything would be final in 3 months. A copy of Ken and Janice's notarized statement was attached to the divorce paperwork. The lawyer's note indicated that the statements would remain private if all terms were agreed upon. There were no questions. Her car was in the driveway, so I knew she was home. I sat there for a while. I had loved Janice. She was the only girl I was ever close to. I assumed our relationship was normal and didn't realize I wasn't meeting her needs. She never directly communicated, and I was too oblivious to pick up the clues. I had failed her in many ways. While her actions were deceitful, I felt some of it was due to my inattention. It felt strange knocking on my own door. She opened it, looking tired. She asked if I wanted a drink. I handed her the papers. Without opening them, she looked at them, and then back at me. I asked, "Why?" I couldn't tell if she was angry or sad. After a pause, she expressed her thoughts, highlighting the disparities between them. She pointed out the contrast in scents, noting his aftershave compared to your fertilizer-like odor. The distinction extended to their clothing choices, with him favoring Armani suits while you preferred jeans. Their dining preferences also diverged, as he indulged in lobster while you savored ribs. The dissimilarities continued with his London fog coat juxtaposed against your Carhartt attire, and his fancy car opposed to your truck. She remarked on the state of their nails, with his being manicured and yours consistently dirty. Additionally, she emphasized the difference in their professional statuses, with him having a real job while you were perceived as just a farm boy. She conveyed regret for their marriage, confessing that her initial reasons were misguided, seeking an escape from her parents through the relationship with Bill without considering the long-term consequences. Despite this apology, her sentiments remained unaltered. She professed love for her children, but simultaneously expressed regret for having them, admitting a lack of maternal instinct. The pursuit of someone to fulfill her dreams, she realized, did not bring the satisfaction she anticipated, but left her feeling more dissatisfied with her current circumstances. She acknowledged misleading Bill and acknowledged being an inadequate mother to their children. However, she did not regret the pursuit of her dreams and the quest for something better. In response to my inquiries about his wife, her demeanor swiftly changed. Instead of remorse, she exhibited anger and a refusal to feel sorry for her actions. She communicated a strong desire to follow the life she had always imagined: a husband with a farm boy background and 2 children with unkempt appearances. She asserted her independence, stating that she didn't need assistance and already had the necessary documents. She concluded by urging me to leave so she could proceed with her chosen path in life. Well, that simplified things. I turned and walked out. When I picked up the boys, Carol said to let her know if I needed more phone calls. I called the utility companies and told them not to disconnect until the end of the month. I felt a little sorry for her. The divorce was final in 3 months. I never heard from Janice. The lawyer said everything went smoothly. My new job was great. However, I missed out on the opportunity to buy the business. Someone else got it, along with prime land. They planned to turn it into a horse breeding farm. My job was secure, but my chance at owning my own place took a setback. 2 weeks later, construction started next to the feed store. We speculated about what was being built until one of the guys asked the site engineer. It was a vet clinic for large animals. They completed the building in less than 60 days. The new owner was due to show up Saturday. On the way to lunch, the boys suddenly yelled, "Cindy! Cindy!" There she was, looking better than ever, with Marge. Cindy had become a veterinarian and wanted to raise show horses while running a large animal clinic. She was building a house nearby. We all went to lunch together, and Cindy shared her plans. The boys and I were beaming all the way home that night. 5 years later, Cindy had a successful clinic and horse breeding venture. I owned 6 feed stores. The boys had 2 baby sisters they adored. My mother-in-law Marge and Mr. Gilbert visited every weekend. I never learned his first name, and Janice never visited the boys. Second story. I'm at a loss for where to begin. It's devastating to realize my wife no longer wants to live with me. What's worse is her refusal to provide a reason. She's resistant to moving in with me, and my mother supports her in this decision. Allow me to provide some context. I'm a 51-year-old man who had to leave my hometown 13 years ago for work, leaving my wife, Mona, who is 48, and our 2 children in Texas. They are now 23 and 21, residing independently in Houston. Around 14 years ago, during the U.S. recession caused by the housing bubble, our business collapsed overnight. With my father's passing and me running his construction business, everything fell apart. Balancing the care of my mother, 2 school-age kids, and my wife became overwhelming in such an unstable economy. After depleting all our savings, I had no choice but to make the tough decision to move out. After exploring opportunities in various Asian countries, I eventually established my business in Dubai. Though challenging, the drive to provide for my family kept me going. After leaving Texas, it took me over a year before I could return home to establish my new venture. Since then, I visited home every 5 to 6 months. I desired to bring my family with me, but Mona and the kids were reluctant due to concerns about disrupting their schooling. Last year, when my youngest daughter finished college and secured a job, I planned to visit home to spend time with her. During that visit, I suggested to Mona that we relocate here now that the children have moved out, but she declined, fearing leaving my mother alone. I proposed bringing my mother along, but they both opposed the idea of leaving their hometown, citing the vast cultural differences in the Middle East. They had valid concerns, so I didn't press further. During my last visit home, I shared with Mona my intention to wrap up things in Dubai and return to Texas. I anticipated her excitement, but instead, she reacted unhappily. I inquired why she didn't want us to live together, and she explained she was content but puzzled why I'd leave everything behind. While she had a point about the sacrifices made to establish myself in Dubai, after 13 years away and with our children grown, I longed to return to my comfort zone. I reassured her about our finances and plans to establish something in Texas given the improved economy. However, she remained unconvinced, which raised concerns for me, though I gave her the benefit of the doubt. The next morning, my mother dropped by unexpectedly and advised against my quick decision to return. Since I hadn't shared my plans with her or anyone else, it must have been Mona who informed her. I was taken aback. Similar to Mona, my mom's concern made me doubt myself. I began to wonder if I was making a mistake and ultimately abandoned the idea. However, I couldn't shake off the distress caused by my wife's reluctance to live with me. While her reasoning might make sense, I felt devastated by Mona's emotional distance. This feeling consumed me so much that upon returning home, I reduced my calls and texts with her. I hoped she would notice and inquire, but she seemed indifferent to whether everything was okay. There were days when I didn't reach out, and she didn't either. Over time, her communication became purely transactional, indicating that she no longer relied on me. So last month, I confronted her, questioning if she still loved me. She dismissed it as overthinking, explaining that she was busy caring for the household and my aging mother. I was at a loss for words. It's uncommon for a wife to bond so well with her mother-in-law and care for them. While I appreciated Mona's kindness to my mom, my unease grew daily. I couldn't comprehend why she didn't want me home when we already had our own house. Our major responsibilities were fulfilled, and I reassured her that our lifestyle wouldn't suffer. It just didn't make sense. Yes, I considered the same possibility as you all might be thinking. Perhaps she found someone else, but how could I uncover the truth? She hadn't shown any other signs until now. She had been a fantastic mother, bravely raising our children during my absence. It wasn't easy. She fulfilled all her roles gracefully. Sometimes I feel guilty for suspecting her, but you know how challenging long-distance relationships can be. Update. Mona had been having an affair, and my mother had known all along but never told me. I can't understand why I deserved this fate. I arranged a surprise trip home without informing anyone, not even my mom. As I entered my house, I dreaded encountering Mona with her lover. It's somewhat ironic, given the stories I've heard about cheating spouses of deployed spouses. Thankfully, that scenario didn't unfold. Mona was in the kitchen when I used the spare key to enter the house. She was visibly shocked to see me. To conceal my surprise visit, I brought a bouquet. Although Mona seemed surprised, she also appeared suspicious of my unexpected arrival and bombarded me with questions. I explained that I had light work that month, prompting me to come home. Mona managed a forced smile, pretending to be pleased, but it was clearly insincere. Over the next few weeks, I painstakingly uncovered the truth. I resorted to tactics I'm not proud of, but I felt I had no choice. I snooped through her phone, listened in on her conversations, planted a GPS tracker in her car, and trailed her around town. This investigation yielded information bit by bit, painting a clear picture of what was happening in my absence. It transpired that she had been seeing someone for the past 8 years. Upon my return home, Mona was unusually guarded about her phone, unlike before when she would clean up all evidence. This time, she didn't have the chance. Although I attempted to snoop through her phone on the first day, I was unsuccessful. When I eventually gained access, I found nothing incriminating. She likely wiped it clean at the first opportunity. The affair came to light when I tracked her movements using a GPS device in her car. Initially, I didn't suspect anything when I observed her entering a hardware store. However, upon waiting for her return, I noticed the owner closing the shop. It left me feeling dizzy. Hours later, I saw Mona leaving the shop, and the owner reopened it once her car had departed. I considered entering the shop to confront her lover, but I hesitated, fearing he might recognize me and ruin my plan. I patiently waited for her next visit, hoping to catch them in the act. She typically ventured out in the afternoon, sometimes visiting my mom with friends or relatives. I followed her everywhere, hoping to catch her with her paramour. Finally, yesterday, she went to visit my mom. Ordinarily, I refrained from following her further on such occasions, which is why it took me so long to catch them. But yesterday, I remained vigilant and witnessed them leaving the house together. It didn't strike me as suspicious at the time. I assumed they were heading for shopping or some other errand. Though I initially resisted the urge to follow them, something compelled me to do so. They stopped at the hardware store, and my heart sank when I saw her lover greet them. Both Mona and my mom exited the car. Her lover kissed Mona in front of my mom, and they conversed briefly. Then, he hugged my mom before she got back in the car and drove off. Mona and her lover entered his shop, and he closed the shutter behind them. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. Betrayal from one's spouse is one thing, but betrayal from one's own mother is unimaginable. The truth overwhelmed me to the point where I had to take a few moments to catch my breath before proceeding to the shop. My knocks went unanswered, so I persisted until her lover finally opened the door. I demanded to know where Mona was, and he froze. I pushed past him and stormed into the shop. Before he had a chance to respond, the lights went out, and I heard a faint voice from the storeroom. Hastily, I rushed in to find my wife lying exposed, pleasuring herself and calling out for someone else. It lasted only a moment before someone else leaped at me and dragged me out as Mona screamed loudly. The scene was so chaotic that it took me a while to grasp what was happening. I struck the intruder and broke free. By then, Mona had emerged, hastily covering herself. I seized her by the arm and demanded to know how long this had been going on, but Mona intervened, pleading for us to discuss it at home. Aware I could face consequences for the altercation, I backed off, exited, and drove away. I headed to my mom's place. Bursting inside, I shouted accusations, convinced she was aware. Mona had already informed her, as my mom's lack of surprise indicated. She simply cried and held my hand, urging me to calm down. I collapsed emotionally. Soon, Mona joined us. Seeing her face only fueled my anger. I implored them both to tell me the truth. After much prodding, Mona confessed to feeling deeply lonely during my absence, for 13 years. I had been so consumed with work that I had little time for her. My calls were brief check-ins about the kids and mom. But what about me? I demanded to know how long this had been going on. She admitted, perhaps 7 or 8 years. Shocked, I felt like a fool. I had toiled abroad for years to provide for my family, only to find this betrayal waiting for me at home. I questioned why she hadn't sought a divorce if our connection had deteriorated so much. She broke down again, insisting she loved me, and the affair was solely to alleviate her loneliness. He meant nothing to her, she claimed. I couldn't believe it. I turned to my mom, asking how I deserved such betrayal from her. She wept, pleading for understanding, explaining Mona had been caring for her. Once I had all the answers, I rose to leave. They tried to stop me, but I warned them not to. I instructed Mona not to return home, needing time alone. Driving back, I felt nauseous. unsure how to process it all. Was this affair truly my fault for sacrificing so much for my family? Update. I spent the following days deeply immersed in sorrow. Afterwards, I drove to Houston to see my grown daughters. They weren't children anymore. They deserved to know what their mother had been doing while I provided for them. I also did it to protect myself. My intention was to leave the country, fearing Mona might manipulate my daughters against me. They were devastated by the truth. The older one even suspected Mona and my mom were up to something. She also mentioned suspecting my mom of seeing a widower nearby. However, that was not my concern. My dad had passed away years ago, so my mom could do as she pleased. Yet, she supported Mona, causing problems for me. The following day, I packed up and returned home. Mona and Mom had been calling incessantly. Since then, I think they came home to find an empty house, facing reality. Initially, I left them for a month. The calls and texts were filled with apologies, pleading for my return. But eventually, they became concerned about money. I intentionally didn't block them, wanting to see their anxiety. Without funds, I froze my bank accounts and credit card. They panicked, realizing they had no income. Mom's state pension wasn't enough to sustain their lifestyle. They tried everything to reach me, but I ignored them. Mom resorted to emotional manipulation, claiming my late father would be heartbroken. Their pleas fell on deaf ears. I never suspected Mona. I never checked her phone like people in long-distance relationships do, but I always respected her privacy more than Mona. I felt betrayed by my mom sometimes, especially when I sensed something was off with Mona. Witnessing their strong bond made me feel betrayed in return. Their excuse for covering up Mona's affair was weak. Feeling lonely, she chose to cheat? She felt alone despite having family and friends around? Compared to her, I was lonelier, literally alone in a foreign land. I could have done the same, but I didn't. I was focused on my family's well-being, working hard to save and return home. When their attempts to contact me failed, they reached out to my daughter for help. Mona didn't know I had told the truth to the girls, and she did exactly what I expected. She spoke ill of me in front of them, alleging I had cut them off financially or was having an affair. However, my daughters saw through her lies and confronted her, driving her away that day. But Mona continued to reach out to my younger daughter, exploiting her innocence for money. However, I won't intervene. She's an adult who knows what to do. Mom has also reached out to my daughter for financial help. As for me, I'm still unable to move on from the feeling of betrayal. I haven't considered divorce yet. Divorce would be financially and personally beneficial for Mona if she wants to marry someone else. However, I won't pursue it. She's already living in my house, and that's the most she can get from me. Being out of the country with no accountability, whether divorced or not, doesn't matter to me. I'm focused on moving on with my life. Update. After cutting off their financial support, they exhausted all possible resources. While my older daughter refused to assist, the younger one was manipulated into helping. However, her earnings from her low-paying first job barely cover her essentials. Despite this, she's saving some to assist her mother, which made me proud. Eventually, she became overwhelmed and suggested Mona find employment to support herself. But Mona took her assistance for granted, insisting it was her daughter's duty to care for her. Despite doing her best with her limited income, my younger daughter reached her breaking point and ceased providing support. Unable to marry someone new while still married to me, Mona has been pressuring me for a divorce. She's threatened legal action, but I'm unfazed. Being abroad, I doubt she has the resources or knowledge to pursue legal action across borders. Plus, in this country, there are no legal consequences for abandoning a cheating spouse. So, good luck to her with that. Currently, Mona works at her partner's shop, though I'm unsure of her compensation, whether it's money or something else. Her partner doesn't even have a proper home, residing in a camper, and his financial situation seems inadequate to support Mona, as far as my mom is concerned. Sometimes, I feel guilty for cutting her off and consider helping her out. However, she receives a pension that should suffice for her needs. She brought this situation upon herself. Perhaps I'll reconcile with her in the future, but not now. Although she's apologized, it didn't feel sincere. I'll wait until she truly regrets her actions and my anger subsides, allowing love to prevail. Some advise me to move on and enjoy the vibrant lifestyle of Dubai, but it's not all as glamorous as portrayed on social media. it requires a substantial amount of money. Moreover, the legal landscape regarding women is stringent here, and I'm not interested in using women to cope with my grief. However, I've been traveling extensively since then, exploring places like China and Bali, with plans to visit more Asian countries and experience their cultures. I had just arrived home on Friday and was eagerly anticipating the weekend. My wife greeted me differently, not with her usual smile and peck, but appearing fidgety and determined about something. It seemed like something was off. I greeted her and inquired about the kids, expressing that it was Friday and they should be home. She informed me that the kids were with Mom until Monday and expressed an urgency in her voice, saying she needed to talk to me. She mentioned having something to tell me, acknowledging that it might be tough for me to grasp. She assured me it wasn't something negative, but might be challenging to understand initially. She asked me to try to understand if I loved her. I agreed to try to understand, and she thanked me, stating that it was something that had been on her mind for a long time and might sound silly or strange at first. She then revealed her desire to be fornicatory with others, and despite my initial laughter, she conveyed seriousness. I questioned if she was divorcing me, but she reassured me that she loved me and would never leave me. She emphasized that this was something she felt she needed to do. As she explained her desire to explore beyond our marriage, anger replaced my initial shock. I expressed my lack of understanding and disagreement with such a decision. She insisted that she was going to do it whether I liked it or not, clarifying that she had never cheated on me and had no intention of doing so. She assured me that she had promised to take precautions and not deny me anything in our bed. However, I wasn't fully present in the conversation, and she noticed my mind was wandering. She emphasized that this had nothing to do with us and made it clear that it was a personal need she felt compelled to fulfill. Despite her pause, I remained motionless and unresponsive. I just sat there staring, appearing to be all but catatonic. My wife of 17 years had just destroyed me and expected me to actually like it, or at least tolerate it. I didn't, and I wouldn't, not ever. Veronica, my wife, expressed her need for this change, explaining that she was getting to a stage in life where she really needed it. She shared her history of being a maiden when we married, and how she had never known another man. She emphasized her desire to explore and understand lovemaking, clarifying that it was only about the physical aspect, not love, except with me. I continued to stare, unable to say anything. The revelation that my wife wanted to explore other men, not just one but multiple, was deeply unsettling. The most shocking part was that she expected me to be okay with it. Veronica urged me to say something, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I rose and headed upstairs to the bedroom, the one that had been ours. Now it meant nothing to me. I felt sick and broken spiritually, my body devoid of sensation. I was overwhelmed with fear. In a remarkably short time, perhaps 15 minutes or less, she had managed to destroy our marriage. I sat on the bed contemplating, or rather, attempting to contemplate. I knew I had to leave the house and distance myself from my wife, a wife who was on the brink of betraying me, and she was determined to proceed, regardless of my feelings. I had been an avid marathon runner in college. Running or taking long walks always helped me clear my thoughts. I decided to walk for a long distance. I changed out of my suit and into comfortable jeans, a Henley shirt, and my $200 running shoes. Grabbing my wallet, a cap, and sunglasses, I descended the stairs. Veronica remained seated in the same spot where she had disclosed her intentions to explore closeness encounters with other men. I paused for a moment, gazing at her. Once again, she felt like a stranger to me. Glancing back at her, my hand on the doorknob, I asked who she was. I turned and exited, slamming the door shut behind me. As I briskly moved forward, her words were drowned out as I shut the door forcefully. I was already past the neighbor's house when she called for me to return and talk. She caught up, running alongside me until she ran out of breath. She continued to plead, expressing that we needed to talk, and she loved me. She assured me that she wasn't doing this to hurt me and emphasized that there was still an us. She professed her love and pleaded for me to come back. She eventually gave up. I think she collapsed on the sidewalk, but I didn't glance back to confirm. I couldn't bear to look at her. She couldn't keep up with the pace I was setting. I could still complete a marathon in under 3 hours without breaking a sweat. Soon I was 2 blocks away, and she was nowhere in sight. Turning the corner, I accelerated, going into overdrive as I called it. I was cruising. I could maintain this pace indefinitely, and perhaps I would. We had met in college. She was distributing cups of water to participants in a 10K event. I had won that race. Later, I joked with her that I had won because I was racing to find her before she slipped away. I caught her just in time, before she disappeared into the crowd of spectators. We hit it off instantly. She worked as a secretary to the dean of the business school. Despite not finishing college, she had secured a significant job due to her meticulous attention to detail and adeptness with written communication. I was a graduate student at the time, studying electronics and computer science. We dated for 6 months before becoming fornicatory, and it was incredible. Despite being a maiden, she was exceptionally skilled in matters of closeness, and she thoroughly enjoyed it. At the time, it didn't occur to me, but she was naturally enthusiastic. There were signs. She just never fully embraced it. We married months after my graduation and 14 months after we first met. I was 26, and Ronnie was a year older at 27. Yes, I'll repeat it. She was still a maiden at 27. Callie and John Jr. arrived in the 9th and 10th years of our marriage, respectively, and we thrived. Ronnie continued as the dean's secretary, and I worked as a computer systems engineer for Peters Limited, a company involved in cutting-edge military research and development. My boss and the owner of Peters Limited was Bill Schuler, a 60-ish bachelor with an almost manic work ethic. Bill and I were not just boss and employee, we were close friends. Veronica and I had been married for about 17 years now, which I had believed to be wonderful. However, evidently, Veronica thought differently. Over the past few months, Ronnie had become somewhat distant, occasionally short-tempered with me, and less frequently with the children. This had led to a couple of heated arguments. While being short with me was one thing, I couldn't tolerate it when it came to the children. I considered that she might be going through menopause. I wasn't well versed in female biology, but I was aware of some things. I had intended to look into it more, but I never got around to it. Now, as I walked, I wished I had. Veronica explained to Roberta that she didn't know where Bobby, her brother, was. She mentioned that he had left the house around 5 p.m. on Friday and hadn't been seen since. Expressing her worry and frantic state, Veronica sought guidance from Roberta, expressing concern about Bobby's whereabouts and asking for help. Roberta Mason could have been my wife's twin, and they had more than once been mistaken for sisters. Both had flowing red hair, curvaceous figures, and adorable freckles. Roberta was maybe an inch taller than Ronnie at 5'7", but otherwise, they were near clones of each other. However, Bobby had a different personality. She was tough-minded, slow to speak, and less inclined to do so, still single at age 40. No, she wasn't gay, but she preferred being independent. Roberta Mason inquired about John, expressing surprise that he would behave in such a manner. Veronica shared that they had a disagreement, and John had walked out without talking. Bobby, concerned about the situation, reassured Veronica that Ronnie, presumably her husband, would find John. However, Bobby wanted to know the details of their argument, to which Veronica responded vaguely, stating it was personal and nothing that should have led John to leave. Roberta, a psychologist, commented on the situation, expressing her intention to find out more when they located John. She noted that Veronica had waited too long to call, hinting at sarcasm. Despite their good relationship, Roberta always felt that Veronica was a bit ditzy. Roberta then asked for details about John's departure, including the direction he headed, his clothing, and if he had taken a coat or his car. Veronica provided information about John going east toward Baxter, wearing a dark green t-shirt, jeans, and a Cubs baseball cap. She mentioned that he hadn't taken a coat or his car, expressing concern about the freezing weather. Roberta acknowledged the urgency of the situation and instructed Veronica to stay home and man the phone in case John called. She assured Veronica that she had her cell phone and would keep her informed as she set out to search for John. The road was icy, so Roberta Mason drove under the speed limit. 10 miles out of town, her cell rang, prompting her to pull over to answer it. She learned that John was in Baxter, and expressing concern, decided to head there immediately before hanging up. In Baxter, a town of 150 with few residents, John found himself indifferent to the place, enjoying a hot meal and warmth in his cell. The steel door at the end of the hall clanged open, and although John couldn't see who was coming, the footsteps signaled someone approaching. As the only prisoner, it had to be him. Upon arrival, Roberta questioned John, asking if he was proud of himself. He inquired if Veronica had called her, and Roberta confirmed, revealing that she had already been on the road looking for him. She expressed concern about his actions, pointing out that he had little ones and a worried wife at home. John sarcastically remarked that the kids might be worried, but Veronica wouldn't be. Roberta acknowledged that Veronica hadn't provided much detail, only mentioning a tiff and John leaving. John explained the disagreement, revealing Veronica's intention to be fornicatory with other men, whether he liked it or not. Roberta's face remained composed as John elaborated on Veronica's plans. The guard sympathetically opened John's cell door, and they walked toward the front receiving area. John was informed that he had been bailed out, but needed to return by Friday to plead. The jailer advised him to pay the fine and settle the damages for the bar fight, which involved broken chairs, a damaged table, and a broken mirror. John agreed, acknowledging the logic of the advice. During the 2-hour-plus drive back, Roberta questioned John about the bar fight. After he shared his story, she remained silent for some time and then began her analysis. As John's sister, she considered herself his patient and insisted on helping him, noting that women go through changes men can't understand, attributing it to hormonal factors that can induce fear and insecurity. I conveyed to Bobby that I wasn't naive, emphasizing that other women don't engage with other men to improve their situations. I spoke with conviction, asserting my position. Bobby countered, sharing a statistic that 60% of men and 40% of women engage in extramarital affairs, contributing to the high divorce rate. She suggested that Veronica might be going through such a phase and needed my support. As I started to respond, she raised her hands to stop me. She clarified that she wasn't advocating for letting Veronica be fornicatory with other men. Instead, she urged me to talk to her, hold her hand, and guide her through this challenging period. Bobby emphasized that Veronica needed my strength and support. I expressed my willingness to do anything to help Veronica, with the condition that if she allowed another man to be fornicatory with her, our relationship would be over without any exceptions. I made it clear that if she disrespected me in that way, I would do my best to bring consequences to both her and her lover or lovers. Bobby fell silent again, and I felt uneasy, perceiving her thoughtfulness as judgment. The conversation then shifted to lighter topics. Observing my accomplishment of walking 100 miles in 2 days, Bobby acknowledged it. I downplayed it, saying it was something I could do and needed the time for introspection, dismissing it as nothing significant. It was a hell of a feat, especially given the temperatures and road conditions at this time of year. "What were you thinking?" she said. She meant, how could I not have thought about the conditions of the weather and the roads? But I extrapolated her words to mean my thoughts about Veronica, myself, and our marriage. Christmas was 3 weeks away, shaping up to be quite the holiday. What awaited me under the yet-to-be-put-up tree? Perhaps a used contraceptive, bearing someone else's seed. I felt furious, and couldn't bring myself to go home just yet. I instructed Bobby to drop me at Peter's, explaining that it was Sunday and I needed to be alone for a while. I suggested that she could go there tomorrow and inform Veronica about my need for solitude. Bobby expressed her understanding and mentioned that she would talk to Veronica, who was quite worried about me. She speculated that Veronica might reconsider her plans, if any, now that she was aware of my feelings. I assured Bobby that I wouldn't do anything rash and just needed more time to think. After dropping me off, I watched Roberta drive away before entering my office. Although she believed Veronica might postpone her plans, I couldn't shake the concern that she might have already acted on them. Reflecting on the loss of trust in my wife, I considered it a significant and troubling situation. "He's afraid he's lost you," Roberta commented upon entering, shrugging off her coat without a greeting. Veronica dismissed the notion, stating that she had told me he would never lose her. Roberta challenged her, emphasizing that when she mentioned making love to other men, any man would be thinking what I was thinking. Veronica, looking troubled, asked if I had told Roberta. Roberta confirmed, stating that she was my sister and that secrets like that couldn't be kept for long. Veronica defended her desire to explore, framing it as something she had always wanted to know about and considered okay to do. Roberta issued a warning, stating that if Veronica went through with it, she would lose me, our children, and most of the friends and relatives who loved her. She emphasized the gravity of the situation, questioning if Veronica realized the consequences. Veronica couldn't meet Roberta's eyes as she explained her need, hoping that Roberta would understand. She revealed that it had consumed her for a long time, expressing uncertainty about being able to help herself. Veronica emphasized that John had always understood her and needed him to do so again. She acknowledged that she couldn't live without him, but was unsure if she could refrain from acting on her desires with someone else. Expressing the real danger of outright cheating, Veronica admitted that the overpowering feeling and need inside her were challenging to resist. Roberta, in response, shared her perspective, stating that she could relate to such overpowering feelings. She explained that despite loving men and not being gay, she chose not to marry because she knew she couldn't remain faithful to one man. She cautioned Veronica about the potential consequences of her proposal, emphasizing the risk of losing everything if she didn't clean up her act soon. Veronica conceded that Roberta might be right, and she started to sob. Roberta comforted her, assuring her that everything would be all right. She offered to stay with Veronica for the night and promised to be there the next day when John returned, ready to referee the situation. Roberta expressed gratitude for Veronica's acknowledgement and advised her to give up the idea of being with other men. She emphasized the importance of convincing her husband that he had nothing to fear, recognizing it as a challenging task. Veronica nodded, allowing herself a small smile, though Roberta missed the slight narrowing of her eyes in response to the last words. Realizing that obtaining her husband's approval was unrealistic, Veronica faced a decision: either abandon her plans entirely or persuade her husband otherwise. These were two distinct choices, but her priority was winning him back, as her love for him remained undeniably true. For the first time since his abrupt departure, Veronica felt a sense of clarity. Answers were within reach. She would soon find out. The following morning, I woke up on the office couch feeling a bit stiff. The lengthy walk and less than ideal sleeping conditions had taken a toll. While accustomed to marathon distances for time, military-style endurance walks were a rarity for me, especially in the last decade. Yet, I was somewhat proud that I hadn't lost my touch. Not yet. I parked in front of the house a little after 10 a.m., knowing Callie and John Jr. would be at school. Veronica opened the door, embracing me tightly. Her relief at my return was palpable. My wife expressed relief, assuring me that she was no longer worried and asking me to forget everything she had said earlier. She admitted to being an idiot and mentioned having a conversation with Bobby, who helped her understand. I remained cautious, my suspicion lingering, as she seemed to have abandoned something she adamantly refused to discuss just a few days prior. I acknowledged her statement with a guarded response, hoping she meant it. Entering the kitchen, I noticed Bobby sitting at the table, sipping her tea. I greeted her and questioned if she was there to support my wife's story. Bobby confirmed that they had talked extensively and expressed hope that we could get through the situation, describing it as a dumb female head trip. Despite the reassurances, something felt off, and I found myself in quite a predicament, lacking trust in my wife. I nodded, hesitant to take anything for granted despite Bobby's insight. She hadn't witnessed or heard Veronica like I had during the Friday confrontation. Over the next few days, Veronica worked hard to reassure me. I was almost starting to buy into Bobby's explanation of a dumb female head trip. Then came Thursday, a peculiar phone call with background noises. I didn't mention it to Veronica, but figured out the words: call, cell, call, my cell. Upstairs, I found her cell on the dresser, checked the call history, noted 6 unknown numbers, and felt lucky. With my military background, I knew uncovering the identities behind those numbers would be easy. Illegal, yes, but my boss had used his clearance for a similar situation. It had been a year. Now it was my turn. This wasn't a no-fault state. If I caught her with evidence, she was mine. Feeling confident that night, the lovemaking was more than good. She had certainly turned things around in the past 6 days. I hoped I wouldn't have to give it up anytime soon. Arriving early in the lab, I aimed to catch Tim before he headed into the field. Tim, our systems installer and field techie, shared a camaraderie with me, fueled by numerous brews as we cheered for our alma mater, Ohio State. I called out to Tim as he passed by, asking if he had a minute. He halted on his way out and agreed to come into my office when I mentioned having a problem and needing his help. In my office, Tim settled into a chair, and I took a seat beside him. I brought up the incident from last year when Mr. Peters had him do some snooping. Tim became suddenly attentive, expressing concern about my involvement in a similar matter. I explained that I had reasons to be concerned and asked if he could assist me. Tim agreed to help, but warned of the risks, emphasizing that I should be certain. I nodded and assured him that if I had anything, I would contact him, requesting that he not discuss it, even with me. He agreed, suggesting that I do some spot checking over the next month and then get back to him. I handed him some phone numbers pulled from my wife's cell, admitting that I didn't know them and that it might be nothing, but it could also be significant. Tim acknowledged that it was a good place to start and noted that it wasn't illegal if my name was on the account, which I confirmed. Reflecting on my wife's actions, I recognized that she had underestimated my tech savviness and connections in the field. If she intended to cheat, her chances of escaping were slim unless she could completely allay my suspicions. It seemed like a precarious strategy, but perhaps her only option. Life settled at home with content kids, a happy Veronica, and me feigning happiness. A week later, Tim asked for a meeting at our usual spot and disclosed that he had checked out the numbers, obtained addresses, and caught Veronica at 2 of them on successive days with pictures, film, and audio evidence. I was informed that my wife was definitely cheating on me, to which I responded nonchalantly, requesting more evidence, especially additional film, as I had plans to take her down along with her lovers. Tim expressed a concern, suggesting that Veronica might be running some kind of sting, but I assured him that I wouldn't be using the gathered evidence in court and had another purpose in mind. Tim, enjoying the espionage aspect, agreed to get more evidence. After 3 weeks, armed with extensive information about the individuals involved, I marveled at the depth of Tim's investigation. It was now a matter of choosing the right time and battleground. I needed to speak with Bobby, and together we watched the gathered evidence in her office. My sister expressed disbelief and irritation, acknowledging that Veronica had even fooled her. Reflecting on the situation, I shared my frustration about feeling deceived and getting sloppy seconds at times. Bobby advised against seeking revenge, emphasizing that it would only eat at me in the aftermath, and our kids would eventually make judgments about both of us. Despite mental torment, I acknowledged her wisdom and decided overt revenge against Veronica was off the table. However, I contemplated retaliating against her lovers, believing that if executed properly, it would make her incredibly unpopular in no time. As it turned out, she had 5 lovers, not 6. The additional number I obtained was a wrong dial to her cell. 4 of her liaisons were married, all with underage children. 2 were individuals whose careers I could significantly jeopardize with minimal effort. 1 a state politician, the other a priest. Veronica had ventured into deep trouble. The influence of a woman's closeness drive had undeniably corrupted her. My sister's choice to remain single for so long suddenly made sense. Veronica would have been better off doing the same. My primary concern was for the children of the cheaters, and, of course, my own. Mine would stay with me. There would be no compromise. While Veronica would have open-ended visitation, no boyfriends would be allowed near them. Otherwise, I would grant her the house, but claim everything else, relocating myself and the children to a lovely 3-bedroom condo near their new elementary school. It was time for war. A tech-savvy friend blurred my wife's face in 5 damning videos and crafted copies for the wives and significant others of the 5 individuals. 2 additional copies were sent to a carefully chosen TV station to expose the priest. I contemplated suing the culprits, but that would have left Veronica vulnerable in court, and I needed to safeguard her to some extent for the sake of my children. I was partially heeding Bobby's advice. The thought occurred to me that technology might eventually put an end to extramarital affairs. It was becoming too easy to expose these individuals. On D-Day, I went to work early, staring at my computer, set up and ready. 1 double click, and 4 husbands would likely become ex-husbands. while another would find himself singing hymns in a remote monastery. I double-clicked. Hell would soon break loose. I smiled, feeling like Joshua at the walls of Jericho, anticipating the walls tumbling down. I informed my section boss that I was taking the rest of the day off and went home. I wondered how long it would take for Veronica to receive the news, or if she would at all, just in case. I loaded one of the videos into the player and turned on the TV. One button push, and she would witness herself in provocative film clips, signaling the end of many things, including our marriage. I went upstairs for a nap and had an idea. I returned to the phone, grabbed the pad, and wrote a note. Play video. An hour later, I heard her car in the garage door. She was home. Waiting at the top of the stairs, mostly out of sight, I saw her pause in front of the TV, reading the note on the tape. She approached the player and pressed start. I could sense her nervousness. Although I couldn't see the video, no more than a minute into it, she fainted. The video continued playing. I descended and turned off the machine. She regained consciousness about half an hour later. I sat on the couch, waiting for her to come to. She spotted me. She groggily asked if I hated her, to which I replied affirmatively, stating there was no chance for reconciliation. Offering her the house and allowing the kids to live with her, I asserted my ownership of everything else: stocks, bonds, savings. I presented the option of preserving a bit of her self-respect if she didn't fight me, but warned of ruining her if she chose to resist. Expressing remorse, Veronica explained that she felt compelled to take certain actions. Despite her apology, I deemed her actions unforgivable and warned her that the consequences had caught up with her. The Mintu was in the process of being ruined, and I advised her not to answer her cell anytime soon, anticipating she wouldn't be welcome around the kids. I informed her that I had already leased a place, and Bobby would take the children there after school. Although she would have visitation rights, I made it clear that none of her male friends were welcome. She nodded in understanding. To her credit, she hadn't started crying or making excuses. Anticipating the tears would come about 2 minutes after I left, I proceeded to leave. Now, all the married individuals were divorced by their wives and taken to the cleaners. The priest was reassigned, but I never found out where the Pole is now. Selling used cars, maybe. Veronica still works for the dean and sees the children often. It was challenging to help them understand why Mommy no longer lived with us, but somehow we got through it. Veronica occasionally dates. Some office friends may set her up, but that's just speculation. I know for a fact that the idea of promiscuity no longer appeals to her. She'll be with us at Christmas. She's still family, but she acknowledges she made a significant mistake and has the decency not to push it with me. Lovemaking, lovemaking, lovemaking. It can be such a destroyer. Second story. I've been married to my wife for 4 years, having dated for 2 before getting married. Although we are still relatively new to marriage, our relationship seemed robust with no signs of trouble. Our love was genuine, and we built a foundation of trust during our courtship. I'm 30, and she's 26. The incident that exposed my wife's infidelity happened on July 4th during a party organized by her friend. Let me provide some context before discussing the incident itself. About a week before July 4th, my wife mentioned her friend's July 4th celebration, and we usually have a reliable babysitter for our 3-year-old. We usually inform the sitter in advance about our babysitting needs for this specific July 4th event. My wife informed me that she had contacted the babysitter, who mentioned her schedule would be packed and she couldn't make it. I was disappointed because spending time with my wife had become rarer since we had our baby. Despite my reservations about her friend, my wife expressed a strong desire to attend the event and suggested I stay home with our child while she goes to her friend's party. Wanting her to have fun, I agreed, saying, "I'll take care of our child at home." Here's the twist. My wife knew I wasn't a big fan of her friend, who is still single and 3 years younger, a bit more carefree. I didn't want to come across as controlling, advising her to watch out for her friend, as she might not be the best influence. On the morning of July 4th, I took an unusual step and decided to call the babysitter myself. Normally, my wife handles these arrangements, and I had to find the sitter's number on her phone. I thought offering the babysitter a higher hourly rate might change her mind. If it worked out, I planned to surprise my wife and let her know we could go to the event together. After all, I wanted to share the news once I had the babysitter situation sorted out and enjoy the satisfaction of pulling off a last-minute miracle. Things started to unravel when I called the babysitter and asked her to reconsider sitting for my son that evening. Even though she had initially declined, she appeared surprised when I used the word reconsider and told me it was the first time I had asked her about that day. Her surprise caught me off guard, and I inquired if she remembered my wife calling her to arrange the evening. A week earlier, she confirmed she hadn't received any call from my wife. I quickly improvised, telling her that my wife had actually called a family member instead. It became clear that my wife had lied for some reason, though I couldn't figure out why, causing concern. I arranged for the sitter to come to our house at 10 p.m., and my wife mentioned she would be leaving around 8 p.m. for the event. Before ending the call with the sitter, I made sure to tell her not to inform my wife about her coming over. I explained that I wanted to surprise my wife and keep the outing I had planned a secret. I almost stumbled over my words when the sitter reminded me that I had mentioned my wife's earlier attempt to secure the date and time. I managed to cover it up by saying that we both thought the date night might have been canceled, but since she was on board, it would still be a nice surprise. As planned, my wife left around 8 p.m. I patiently waited for the sitter, who arrived on time. Once she was there, I headed to the party my wife had mentioned. Honestly, I had a suspicion that she might not show up and go somewhere else instead, but to my surprise, she was indeed at the party. Her friend greeted me upon my arrival, and seeing me there surprised her. She quickly called my wife over. It's an understatement to say she was just shocked. Her reaction was more like utter disbelief. It had only been around 3 hours since my wife left home, but she already seemed quite intoxicated. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her reception towards me was chilly. She repeatedly asked why I was there and who was taking care of our child. I reassured her that I had the babysitter situation under control, and she shouldn't worry. I just wanted us to enjoy the evening together and watch the fireworks display. The party, in a medium-sized setting with maybe 15, 20 people, had a noticeable gender ratio, more guys than girls, almost like a 2-to-1 ratio. We managed to move past the awkward initial interaction, but that still didn't explain why my wife had been deceptive about the outing. The event seemed to revolve around a game night with a focus on playing truth or dare games. I overheard one of the guys suggesting they get back to the game. I decided it was time to catch up on what I had missed, and joined a friendly group of guys, the ones quite talkative due to the flowing drinks or their outgoing personalities. Amidst the gathering, my wife's behavior became agitated and uneasy, and she expressed her desire to leave and go home. Her sudden request to leave raised a red flag for me, suggesting that she was definitely hiding something. I assured her we could head home, but I asked for a moment to try some drinks since I had just arrived. I headed to the kitchen and struck up a conversation with one of the guys there. After introducing myself to a random guy, I inquired if he was enjoying the party. He introduced himself as well and confirmed that he was indeed having a good time. I told him I was interested in making a move on one of the girls at the party, but I wasn't sure who was available. I began pointing to the different girls one by one, and he helped me identify who was already in a relationship and who seemed open to approach. Using this approach, I eventually pointed to my wife without revealing her identity to the stranger. I then asked him what he thought about her. He mentioned that my wife was attractive, but he warned me that she was off limits because she arrived with the guy he knew as a friend. I pretended to be interested and asked him to share more details about this guy. The stranger went on to give me information about my wife's affair partner, explaining that they had met at a concert and had been involved with each other fornicatorily since then. This revelation really hit me hard. The timeline of when my wife attended the concert and met this guy matched up perfectly. This struck a chord because I was also present at that very same concert. What bothered me was the fact that I was with her most of the time during the event, except when she wanted to get some snacks and insisted on going alone. I recall that it took her an unusually long time to return with her snacks, but I brushed it off, assuming there was a long line or she needed to use the restroom. This incident occurred about a month ago, and since then, she has been frequently leaving the house and even had a trip out of town. This new revelation left me questioning everything. The stranger was boasting about my wife, as if she were some kind of prize he had won for his friend. He kept on talking, sharing a few more details. He explained that he had come to the party to pursue my wife's friend. When he described her as a free spirit, I wasn't sure if my reaction was noticeable, but I couldn't fake it anymore. Just then, my wife's friend joined the conversation, possibly realizing that my questions were leading to the truth about my wife's affair. However, it was too late, and I could tell that she was also part of the deception. I excused myself from the conversation but asked my wife's friend about my wife's whereabouts. She suggested checking the patio, and that's where I found my wife talking to the guy. It seemed like they were either having a heated discussion or she was trying to convince him of something. I approached them and introduced myself to the man who was involved with my wife, but before I could say anything to him, my wife hastily pulled me away, insisting that we should leave the party. I swatted her hand away with anger and told her she could leave because I wanted to have a talk with the man. I confronted him directly, introducing myself as her husband. I asked him straightforwardly if he knew my wife was married before getting involved with her. Considering I had already discovered the truth about their relationship, I have a somewhat imposing presence that I use to my advantage in confrontations. Honestly, I wasn't looking to fight him if he genuinely didn't know she was married. My little show of subtle aggression was meant to let my wife know that I had uncovered her infidelity and to unsettle the guy a bit. I repeated my question to him, making it clear that I didn't want to ruin the party by starting a brawl, but I needed to know if he was aware of my wife's marital status before getting involved with her. My wife was getting anxious and tried to hold me back while apologizing. The guy, seeing the bottle in my hand and realizing he was cornered on the patio with no support, fell for my act and started apologizing as well. He mentioned that he didn't intend to cause any trouble and that he had only started talking to my wife without knowing she was married. I inquired about the number of times they had been together, and he gave a response. I simply wished him a good night and walked away. I hopped in my car and drove back home. I told my wife that I wanted a divorce. I checked into a hotel where I'm writing down my story as a form of self-therapy. I'm feeling lost about what steps to take. This is my first experience with divorce, and I'm completely unfamiliar with co-parenting since I didn't grow up in a household like that. What I do know is that I can't bear the thought of seeing that woman, and this incident is making me physically sick.
Husband discovers wife's cheating, takes ultimate revenge, and disappears without a trace. Flo, or Florence, was my spouse. I'm Jim. We met in college and tied the knot shortly after graduating. Our life together followed the usual path of husband and wife, with kids, a home, and a mortgage. Flo stayed home to care for our children until they grew up. Then she went back to her career in real estate. Flo's an attractive woman, and I reckon she faced some teasing at work from time to time, but, as far as I know, she stayed loyal to me in our marriage. She has a bit of a naughty sense of humor sometimes, which I reckon might have caused some trouble in our marriage. We had 2 kids, a boy named Eric and a girl named Patty. When this all went down, Eric was 21 and had finished vocational school. He had his own place nearby and worked as an electrician. Patty was 19 and studying at a state university about 150 miles away. With the kids out of the picture, we looked ahead to a happy retirement, hoping for some travel and, hopefully, grandchildren to spoil. Our bed life was what I'd consider normal. We had a loving relationship that grew over our years together. Initially, we were physically engaged almost every night and on weekends, but over time, it tapered to a couple of times a week, which was fine by me but seemed to diminish Flo's interest too. Over time, I mastered pushing all the right buttons to bring Flo to her peak, yet nearly every scenario comes with a snag. Ours arrived in the form of a new neighbor, about 5 years back. Roger and his wife Alice moved in next door, and we struck up a friendship. The issue with Roger was his love for pranks. He'd pull them on anyone he could, much to my dismay. I often found myself on the receiving end. What bothered me even more was Flo's enjoyment of his antics, especially when they targeted me. I tried explaining my discomfort to her, even joining in at times, but she didn't listen or back down. With time, I noticed Roger's interest in Flo, suspecting he harbored desires beyond mere friendship. Whenever we were together, he and Flo shared laughs over his sometimes crude jokes, leaving Alice and me to politely smile at their antics. In public, I could tell Alice felt as disheartened as I did about their behavior. I vividly recall one day at the beach when Roger mocked some boars passing by, and to my dismay, Flo joined in. Alice and I were stunned by their recklessness, but our reprimands fell on deaf ears as they laughed uproariously together. Right before the conclusion, I started sensing things spiraling out of hand. We were over at Roger and Alice's place, with Alice and I chilling in the backyard while Flo went inside with Roger to help grab drinks. We chatted for a bit until we realized they'd been gone for a while. Concerned, we headed indoors to find them in the kitchen. We found no one, but as we began searching, they strolled out of the living room, arms wrapped around each other, giggling away. Roger sported lipstick smudges on his collar and around his mouth, while Flo's lipstick was askew and her hair tousled. Alice and I stood there, mouths agape, utterly taken aback. "Hey guys, sorry for the delay on drinks. Got caught up showing Flo my artwork," Roger said, seemingly oblivious to their appearance. Alice and I remained rooted in shock, stunned by their brazen display. "Roger's got some amazing prints. You know what I mean, right, Alice?" Flo chimed in with a smirk. At that point, I gathered my thoughts and finally spoke up. "What's happening here?" I directed at Flo. "Why does Roger have lipstick all over him and you look like you've been kissed?" "Oh, that's because I got really into admiring Roger's engravings. I guess I got carried away." "You're not mad, are you?" she asked, trying to maintain a composed demeanor. As I studied their expressions, it dawned on me. Roger had that smirk he gets when he's about to pull one of his jokes, and Flo was avoiding my gaze, struggling not to burst into laughter. My irritation flared. Alice, still unaware, chimed in at last. "What's happening, Roger? If you think you can carry on with another woman in our home, you better think again." As Roger and Flo erupted into laughter. I think Alice caught on and smiled sheepishly, but I couldn't contain my anger. "One of these days, you two will push it too far, and it won't end well." "Oh, lighten up, darling. It's just a prank. If you could see how you both looked, you'd find it funny too," Flo said between laughs. "Come on, guys, let me fix you a drink and we can all laugh this off," Roger chimed in, strolling into the kitchen with Flo trailing behind, still giggling. Alice and I simply shrugged and trailed after them, shaking our heads in disgust. "One day, Alice, they're going to push it too far," I reiterated. "One of these days, their pranks will backfire and someone will get hurt." Alice nodded in agreement. That night, when we returned home, I could tell Flo sensed my lingering anger, especially regarding her role in the prank. "I'm really sorry, honey," she said. "I just got carried away. Nothing serious happened. I just smeared some lipstick on him and messed up his hair. We never expected you guys to be upset. We were about to call it off when you and Alice showed up. Are you still mad? It was just a joke." "I'm trying not to be, Flo, but you have to stop getting involved in Roger's pranks. I nearly had a heart attack seeing you look like you were kissing him. You know how important loyalty is to me." "I understand, honey. I value loyalty just as much and would never do anything to hurt you. Just please remember that, okay? Give me a passionate kiss and forgive me," she pleaded. A couple of weeks later, we were back at Roger and Alice's for dinner on a Saturday night. Just as we finished eating, a call came in that Roger mistakenly thought was for Alice. Alice worked as an ER nurse at a local hospital. After he hung up, he turned to Alice. "It's the ER. There's been a bad car wreck, and they need you there as soon as possible." "Ah, damn, let me change and head out." 10 minutes later, Alice was on her way to the hospital. Once she'd left, Roger turned to me and asked if I could lend a hand with a project in his basement. While I helped, Flo remained silent, avoiding eye contact. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but later it struck me. "What do you need?" I asked, getting up to join him downstairs. "I need you to hold something for me while I fix it to the ceiling. It's not too heavy, but I can't hold it up and attach it at the same time, and Alice is too short for this." "Sure, sounds straightforward. Trust me, it is. It'll only take a minute." As we descended the stairs, he directed me to a metal support post near the stove on the floor above. He took a small metal box with a power cord hanging from it off his workbench and hoisted it up to the ceiling between the support post and the furnace. I noticed Flo had followed us down and was watching with a smile. Again, I didn't think much of her presence or her odd grin. "Now, I need you to hold this while I attach it," Roger instructed. "What's this for?" I questioned, lifting my hands to grasp the box. With Roger between the pipe and the furnace, I had to wrap my hands around the pipe to press the box against the basement ceiling. "I'll explain in a sec, but let me grab my tools first." He vanished behind his desk, leaving me holding the box. He returned moments later, and I didn't see what he had until I felt 2 quick clicks as something hard and metallic closed around my wrists. Suddenly, I realized I'd been tricked. I was handcuffed to the pipe. Shocked, I turned to see Roger putting his arm around Flo's waist as they looked at me. My mind raced, but I managed to demand, "What's going on, Roger? Get these damn cuffs off." "Sorry, buddy, can't do that. Flo's so fond of my prince she wants another look. But this time, we don't need you or Alice around," he explained as he and Flo ascended the basement steps. Flo exaggeratedly swayed her hips as they left. "Let me loose. This is going too far, Roger. You'll regret it if you don't release me right now." "Relax, dear. I just want to admire some engravings," Flo chuckled as they disappeared, leaving me struggling with the handcuffs. As I tried to free myself, I realized the hopelessness of my situation. The pipe was anchored in the concrete floor below and secured to a steel I-beam overhead. As I strained to hear, I sensed their movement into the master bedroom directly above me, accompanied by Flo's excited giggles. Shoes thudded onto the carpet above, and I heard hurried whispers urging the removal of garments. "Brian, I desire you greatly," Flo whispered urgently. My fury mounted as I continued to frantically struggle with the handcuffs. Above, the bed began to creak, and I imagined them engaging in intimacy. I cursed the restraints and my disloyal wife overhead. My wrists grew raw and bloody from my relentless efforts. Emotions churned within me as Roger grunted and Flo moaned in unison. Then, silence blanketed the upstairs for a brief moment. Ceasing my struggles, I lay on the unforgiving cement floor, hands clasped around the pipe. A profound sadness settled in my heart as Flo exclaimed, "That was amazing, Roger. I'll have to admire your work again someday." "Let's dress and check on Jim downstairs," Roger replied. "Sure, Flo, I need a breather, but Alice might return soon from that phony call I made, and I'd rather she not find us in bed together." Minutes later, footsteps echoed on the basement stairs, but I didn't lift my gaze as they neared my prone form. Oh, damn, look at his wrists all bloody," Flo gasped. "Honey, it was just a prank. Nothing happened." "Oh God, I'm so sorry. Roger, hurry and unlock the cuffs so we can tend to his wrists. Oh God, I never thought he'd take it this hard." Tears streamed down my face as Roger fumbled with the handcuff key. "Roger, hand Flo the key before you unlock me and run. Once I'm free, you'll regret ever being born," I warned, glaring at him. He met my gaze wordlessly, passing the key to Flo as he edged toward the stairs. Fear flickered in his eyes while Flo began unlocking the handcuffs. Once the cuffs were off, I heard Roger's truck revving up, tires screeching as he peeled away. Rising to my feet, I peered down at Flo, still crouched on the floor, fear etched across her face. "You better find somewhere else to stay tonight, or I could seriously hurt you. Call before you attempt to come home." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she grasped the magnitude of the pain she'd caused. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. It was just a prank. We didn't do anything." "Flo, I don't want to hear excuses about it being a joke ever again. To me, it's as if you cheated, and that's all that matters now. From here on out, I'll treat it as infidelity and betrayal. Expect a call from my lawyer soon. We're finished," I declared, turning and ascending the stairs. "No, Jim, please." "Nothing happened," she cried out from the basement. "What do I tell the kids?" I didn't respond, heading toward the front door. Just as I was getting into my car, a frantic Alice pulled into their driveway. "Where the hell is my lousy husband?" "There was no accident, and I didn't need an ambulance," she exclaimed as she stepped out of the car. Suddenly, she noticed my wrists. "What happened, Jim?" "Dear God, look at your wrists. Let me bandage them for you." Roger and Flo pulled another stunt. I sighed. "Alice, they've crossed the line this time. I'm divorcing Flo." "Oh God, what happened?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "You'll hear it from Flo and Roger. I'm heading home to take care of my wounds. Once there, you can inform my cheating ex-wife that she'll find her belongings on the porch. If she wants back in, she'll need a court order." "Oh God, what did they do?" Alice wailed, rushing into the house in distress. I climbed into my car, my anger simmering. Arriving home, I cleansed my wrists with antibacterial soap, applied ointment, and bandaged them methodically. I packed Flo's belongings into plastic bags, placing them outside. Ignoring the ringing phone, I focused on the task. After locking up, I undressed and lay on the bed, unable to sleep despite my exhaustion. In the morning, the phone rang again, but I declined to answer. After showering and eating breakfast, I changed my bandages. Around 10, the doorbell chimed, and I peered out to find Alice on the doorstep. Inviting her in, I gestured for her to enter. "They really went too far this time, didn't they?" she remarked as she stepped inside. "Unfortunately, yes," I replied. "What's your plan?" she inquired as I told her. "I'm filing for divorce, but they claim nothing happened. Just another one of their jokes." "Flo really wants to talk to you," Alice mentioned. "My perception is that they did it, and as far as I'm concerned, that's reality. I'll schedule a meeting with a divorce attorney first thing Monday, I responded calmly. You're incredibly upset, aren't you? Can't you wait until you've cooled off before making such a drastic decision? You've invested nearly 24 years in each other. Don't you want to salvage anything? She reasoned. I won't tolerate being betrayed. I've warned Flo numerous times, and in my eyes, she betrayed me. It's over, I declared. But they insist nothing actually happened. They just made it seem that way, Alice argued. Their words are not proof. It felt as though it could have happened, I explained. And they can't prove it didn't happen, so I have to trust my perception that it did. She showed no respect for me, I stated firmly. Can't you hold off and seek counseling? Flo's devastated by this, Alice pleaded. I warned her before, but she didn't listen, I retorted. I've said my piece. Let the lawyer handle it. If you're content with Roger's involvement, that's your choice, but he'd better steer clear of me, I concluded. I haven't decided what to do about Roger yet, but I hate to see our friendship end over this. Roger feels genuinely sorry and wants me to pass on his sincere apologies to you, Alice said. Make it clear that our friendship is over, I insisted. Although I'd like to stay friends, Alice, I think it's best if we don't see each other while you're still with him. Is there anything I can tell Flo to give her hope for your forgiveness? Alice asked. If she can prove she didn't sleep with Roger, I'll consider it. I don't trust Roger or her word that it was just a joke. I feel like it happened, and that's enough for me, I replied. Okay, Jim, I'll let her know. I'll miss you, Alice said sadly. I'll miss you too, Alice. Let me load Flo's things into your car so you can take them to her. I assume you still have it. She's moving in with her sister this afternoon. Her sister lives on the other side of town. She's a widow and lives alone, so there's space for Flo, maybe indefinitely. After loading Flo's belongings into Alice's car, I waved her off, then returned to the house. First, I looked up a locksmith to change the locks. It occurred to me that if I went to work on Monday and Flo changed the locks, I'd end up locked out. I arranged for the locksmith to come the same day. Then I unplugged my phone and switched off my cell. I dedicated the entire day to household chores until the locksmith's arrival. Once he departed, I hopped into my car and made a trip to the local supermarket, stocking up on a few frozen dinners to sustain me for about a week. Upon returning to my now solitary home, I couldn't shake the absence of Flo after nearly 24 years together. However, my anger toward her and what she, along with Roger, had done lingered. Around 7:30 that evening, while watching TV, the doorbell chimed. Peering out the window, I spotted Flo's sister, Mary, at the doorstep. Hello, Mary, I greeted as I opened the door for her. Hi, Jim. Can I have a moment of your time? Of course, Mary. Come on in, I welcomed. We proceeded to the living room where she settled into a seat while I asked if she wanted a drink. A Coca-Cola would be fine, she requested. After fetching the drinks, I returned to the living room. I suppose you know why I'm here, she began after taking a sip. Yes. Are you here to plead for her return? If so, you've come in vain, I responded bluntly. No, she confided in me about everything. How are your wrists? She inquired. They're healing, scabbing over, no signs of infection, I informed her. Flo will be relieved to hear that, Mary remarked. She's on the brink of a breakdown, particularly because you refuse to speak with her. That's why I'm here, to deliver a message, or rather a few messages, she continued. Very well. I'll hear your messages, but I can't promise anything in return, I stated. Firstly, she loves you deeply and regrets her actions, Mary conveyed. All right, anything else? I prompted. She wants you to know she's willing to undergo a lie detector test to prove she's telling the truth. It's the only proof she can offer that nothing happened with Roger or anyone else, Mary disclosed. This proposition was a novel idea I hadn't considered. I pondered it for a moment while Mary observed me, sipping her cola. It sounds typical, but I have conditions. Firstly, proof that she didn't sleep with Roger doesn't guarantee reconciliation. Secondly, Roger must also undergo the same test with matching results. Thirdly, I require approval from the test administrator for questions. Lastly, I won't cover the test expenses. That seems fair, Jim, but wouldn't you consider reconciliation more if the tests prove their honesty? No. She deeply wounded me. Even if I decide to take her back, it will take a long time to forgive her, I asserted. Understood, Jim. I'll convey your terms to her. I'm truly sorry. I intended to be furious with her for her foolishness when she came by this afternoon. However, she looked so distressed that I doubt anything I could say would worsen her state. She's aware of her grave mistake and the pain she's caused you. I'll give her some sleeping pills to help her rest tonight. Also, she contacted your children and confessed her actions. They seemed upset with her, as she hasn't stopped crying since speaking with them. I should return to deliver your message. Thanks for the cola. No problem, Mary. I appreciate your concern. After her departure, I reflected on the situation. Some of my initial rage had subsided, allowing me to think more clearly about my desires. I decided to have a drink first, heading to my office where the drinks cabinet stood. Pouring myself half a glass of scotch, I added an ice cube in the kitchen. Without returning to my seat, I wandered the house, reminiscing about our shared married life. Did I truly want to end it all? My contemplation was interrupted by the doorbell ringing. Peering out the window, I spotted our daughter Patty standing at the front door, visibly discontent. Oh, I thought. She might have realized the locks were changed and her key didn't work. Upon opening the door, Patty strode inside, casting me a hostile glance. What's up with the locks, Dad? And why are you ignoring calls? I had to drive 150 miles to get some answers. Sorry, Patty. I didn't mean to avoid talking to your mother. I heard from Aunt Mary that she briefed you on what happened. Yeah, and I'm really upset with you for kicking her out just because of a joke. Can't you forgive her and let her come home? When she phoned me to disclose her actions, I realized she acted foolishly. Patty, it transcended mere humor. I had previously cautioned her about the pranks she and Roger engaged in, but she disregarded my warnings. I couldn't glean much from Mom during our phone conversation, but I gathered it was intended as a jest. What could be so objectionable about that? I elaborated on the events, starting with the earlier lipstick smudge prank and our ensuing conversations. Then I recounted the more serious joke, revealing the scars on my wrists by rolling up my sleeves. Daddy, this is awful. Is that when you asked her to leave? Yes, it seemed like they might have had lovemaking. It sounded just like they described, and I know your mom's bedroom noises. Either that, or they're exceptional actors. I believe they did it. That's my reality. Unless she proves otherwise, I suggested your mom take a lie detector test, and Roger too. If the results prove true, I'll have to trust her, but it hurt deeply that she thought I'd find being betrayed a joke. I might not be able to reconcile with her. I'm really sorry about all this, Dad. I hope you and Mom can work through it because I love you both despite what she did. I'm trying to make it work, baby, because I miss your mom dearly, but I'm still struggling with her lack of respect for me. Okay, Daddy, I understand. Now that I know what happened, I'm going to visit Mom and try to calm her down. I'll probably stay at Aunt Mary's tonight, and I have to return to school tomorrow. Please turn on your phone so I can reach you. Eric also wants to talk to you. He's working upstate and tried to call you after Mom contacted him. Sure, baby. I'll switch the phones back on once you're gone. Come here for a hug. I embraced her tightly, feeling how much she resembled her mother, which was both comforting and unsettling. I cherished her deeply. She'd always been my little girl. Goodbye, Daddy, she said, opening her car door. I waved as she drove off, then returned inside, resuming my solitary drink and turning my phones back on. A couple of days after Flo's sister Mary visited, she called to inform me that Flo had agreed to my terms for the lie detector test, and Roger had also consented. Roger offered to cover the cost of his test as a sign of remorse for his involvement in the prank. Mary also provided me with the contact information for the testing administrator. My anger toward Flo for her involvement in the prank had somewhat subsided, but I felt deeply despondent. If she truly loved me and hadn't been physically engaged with Roger, how could she participate in such a humiliating joke? I began to entertain the possibility that her love for me had waned, despite her claims of wanting reconciliation. It boiled down to whether I was willing to endure a loveless marriage if tests confirmed no carnal involvement. Flo attempted to reach out to me multiple times, but I promptly ended the calls upon hearing her voice. Subsequently, her sister acted as an intermediary, relaying Flo's apologies and desires to reconcile. However, I maintained my stance, insisting on awaiting the results of the lie detector tests before making any decisions. During this period, our son Eric fervently urged me to forgive his mother and allow her to return home. Despite my efforts to explain the situation and the hurt her actions caused, he struggled to comprehend my pain and persisted in his plea for her return. I realized that our relationship could become strained if we ended up divorcing. Thankfully, our daughter Patty showed more empathy and support for my situation. After Mary provided me with the test administrator's contact details, I reached out to legal and law enforcement acquaintances for insights. Reassured by their recommendations, I scheduled an appointment with the administrator, confident in his ability to conduct an impartial test. The following day, I discovered that Flo and Roger had already contacted the test administrator, Jack Heron, and scheduled tests for both of them in 2 days. They designated me as an interested party authorized to control the questions asked. I informed my boss the next day about needing personal time and visited Jack Heron's office. After explaining the situation to him, we discussed the questions he would pose to determine whether Flo and Roger had engaged in carnal activity. Jack assured me that he would ask the same questions to both parties, compile their responses, and provide a final written report. He agreed that matching test results from both would confirm no carnal activity. Had this not been the outcome, trust in Flo might have been irreparable, leading to inevitable divorce if the tests indicated lying. Returning to work, I felt more assured that clarity regarding any carnal involvement would soon emerge, yet I acknowledged that challenging decisions lay ahead. Over the next 3 days, I adhered to my usual work routine, staying late to avoid returning to an empty home. Evening meals were taken at a nearby diner, followed by whiskey at home, where sleep was elusive. The absence of Flo's warmth and love weighed heavily on me. Before the morning of the test, uncertainty lingered. However, a clear lie detector report would pave the way for Flo's return, with the assurance that she'd refrain from any more insensitive pranks, especially after seeing how deeply the last one affected me. The tranquility lasted until the phone rang just after 11. It was Alice. "Jim, it's Alice. I found something important. Roger's at the testing center. Can you come now?" Her tone sounded ominous, prompting me to rush next door. Following our usual routine, I entered through the front door and heard Alice's voice from the office. Inside, I found her at her desktop computer, wearing a concerned expression. "Jim, I need you to see this." I pulled up a chair beside her. "Jim, Roger's been acting secretive since Tuesday. A couple of times I caught him quickly minimizing something on the monitor when I passed by this door. Also, he tends to leave the room when he's on the phone. I'm pretty sure he spoke to Flo yesterday. This is my first chance to check our computer without him around." With that, Alice clicked on the Google icon, revealing his search history since Tuesday. My blood ran cold as I scanned through some of the research. There were 4 different searches on how to beat a lie detector test. Alice and I sat side by side, reading through many of the pages her husband had browsed. After digesting enough, we retreated to her living room to discuss our findings. Our conversation continued until we heard Roger's car pull up outside. As he entered and greeted us with a wary look, he took a seat on the couch opposite Alice and me. If I hadn't been observant, I might have missed the slight limp as he favored his left leg. This was all the reassurance I needed. "Roger, I believe you passed the test with flying colors." "Honestly, I had a hunch nothing untoward happened that day," I remarked, catching Alice's puzzled glance out of the corner of my eye. I realized I hadn't shared my plan with her yet. I spoke up. "If you promise that you and Flo will never pull another stunt like this again, I'm willing to let bygones be bygones and shake hands. Perhaps even skip reading the report altogether." Relief washed over his face as he readily gave his word. With a smile, I rose from my seat and approached him. As he extended his right hand, I took a step closer, firmly planting my foot on his right leg. The expected discomfort failed to register. Instead, his face drained of color as he let out a piercing scream, collapsing back onto the couch. Frantically, he used both hands to free his foot from under mine, eventually tearing off his shoe. Alice and I watched as the shoe came off, revealing blood-soaked socks. He continued to groan in pain. Glancing sideways at Alice, I saw her discomfort at the sight of blood. Keeping my gaze on her, I smiled as I noticed her realization, connecting our earlier reading with the wound on Roger's leg. "I won't bother with the report because I know it'll be nonsense. Did you nail your shoe to press on it while answering their security questions, trying to mask your lies? It had to backfire eventually, didn't it? Trying to induce sweat and a faster heart rate with harmless questions, making the results appear truthful," I concluded. The anguish on Roger's face softened slightly, giving way to a look of despair as he glanced between me and Alice. "Yeah, I did cheat. And I showed Flo how to do it, but not for the reason you're thinking. Seriously, man," he confessed. "All right, Alice, brace yourself," I remarked as we both resumed our seats, and Roger gently applied pressure to his soul to staunch the bleeding. Observing Alice's disapproving expression at the mess on the floor, I briefly entertained the thought of suggesting that she make him clean the carpet with his tongue. To his credit, Roger remained silent, offering no attempt to dramatize this new revelation. "We didn't know what questions you posed to the examiner. What's so complicated about asking if we had lovemaking?" I interjected. "Sure, we probably would have aced that one, but we were concerned you'd delve into something more subtle." "Like what?" I prodded further. "Well, has our conduct always aligned with the standards of a marital relationship?" Roger began, but before he could finish, Alice interjected angrily, indicating an obvious negative response to that query. "Why else would you go to the trouble of sticking a damn nail in your shoe before the test?" I pressed on. "I'm guessing the fact that you arrived with the nail still lodged inside means you forgot to bring extra." shoes, or a pair of pliers. Planning ahead has never been your strong suit, has it? I added, addressing Alice as I spoke. Please, honey, I didn't want to lose you, and Flo certainly didn't want to lose Jim. So, dear husband, when and what did you do that wouldn't measure up to the standards of a marriage? Alice inquired, her tone stern. Roger shifted uncomfortably in his chair and responded in a subdued voice. It was that day we pretended to be fooling around upstairs. We were just jumping on the bed. As you can imagine, we were both fully clothed, he hurriedly clarified, explaining. We were bouncing on the bed, causing it to squeak. I can't even recall who initiated it, but somehow we began touching each other through our clothes. We both found it enjoyable. We were incredibly foolish. I felt a bit puzzled. I pride myself on being a good judge of character, and this rings true. If not, Roger is exceptionally skilled at conjuring excuses on the spot. I glanced at Alice. Is this satisfactory? I asked. Not even close, she retorted. This pair has demonstrated such proficiency in deception and scheming that I am far from convinced, Alice continued. Roger, tend to your leg, apply some antiseptic, bandage it, and then I suggest you leave. I need time to contemplate, plus there's the matter of cleaning up yet another one of your messes, Alice snapped, indicating a stain on the carpet near Roger's foot. Despite Roger's acting skills, the look of dread on his face betrayed his deep concern about the fate of his marriage. I have a video, Alice, he blurted out suddenly. What? I exclaimed. Simultaneously, we sounded like a twisted duet. I installed a camera in our bedroom before we handcuffed you in the basement. I captured everything, Roger confessed. Before I could react, then why the hell didn't you mention this a few days ago? I demanded. Roger didn't need to respond to that question. If the video depicted them pleasuring each other, even while fully clothed, it wouldn't be something two spouses eager to reconcile with their partners would want to share publicly. Personally, I strongly believe that the boundary of infidelity extends far beyond the actual physical act. Any form of closeness, including a simple kiss on the lips, would constitute crossing a line that should not be crossed. I had the intention to do so, but Flo feared your reaction, Roger explained. We instructed Roger to tend to his leg and then present us with the video. While Roger was out of the room, I sent Flo a message. I couldn't resist adding to her already mounting anxiety. Remove the nail from your shoe and come over to Alice's house. Roger is going to show us a video. Normally, it's just a minute's walk from Mary's house to ours, but it took a good 35 minutes before there was a knock on the door. Alice opened it and welcomed Flo and her sister Mary. Flo's makeup was smudged and her eyes were teary. Mary explained that my wife panicked as soon as she read my message, realizing that I had caught on to her little scheme. Flo appeared far less composed about the test results than Roger did upon his return home. Mary simply glanced at me and raised her eyebrows at Flo's further self-destructive behavior. Flo attempted to embrace me, but I guided her to sit beside me on the couch. She kept studying my expression, seemingly trying to gauge my feelings. I wondered if Mary had any inkling about the contents of the video. Alice and I didn't waste time during those 35 minutes. Our discussion centered around what our likely course of action would be if the video indeed confirmed Roger's claims. Alice had already made up her mind that she would likely forgive Roger for the bedroom incident, albeit after letting him stew for a bit. As for me, I was more conflicted. My initial emotional reaction was that my wife had betrayed me, something I had always deemed unforgivable. However, my logical reasoning was more composed. Flo had been an exemplary wife for 24 years, and our children had made it abundantly clear that they would be devastated if I didn't forgive her. A minute after everyone settled in, Roger arrived with his laptop, a USB flash drive protruding from one port while a cable emerged from the other. He positioned the computer next to the TV and powered it up. I found it odd that he didn't simply insert the flash drive directly into the TV. Then I recalled Alice's remark about his lack of tech savviness. Once the image on the computer screen synchronized with that on the TV, Roger muttered another apology and hit play. Flo kept her gaze averted from everyone in the room, including the TV. She was undoubtedly aware of my uncompromising stance on fidelity, making this an incredibly uncomfortable situation for her. Mary observed the screen intently, seemingly unaware of what was about to unfold. Roger appeared more at ease once again. He settled beside Alice and attempted to hold her hand, but she withdrew it. The clip, lasting about 10 minutes, essentially depicted what Roger had previously described. It was largely devoid of any eroticism. Within moments of its commencement, both protagonists appeared fully clothed, just as Roger had stated. Flo turned him onto his back, then positioned herself on top of him, echoing verbatim what I had heard while handcuffed in the basement. We observed that it was Roger who initiated the hand game, though Flo followed closely behind. This was incredibly difficult for me to witness for several reasons. Firstly, no man with any self-respect, apart from a few outliers, desires to witness his wife in such a scenario with another man. Secondly, it triggered painful PTSD as I relived the words that had devastated me less than a week ago. It reignited the burning and throbbing sensation in my wrists, a painful reminder of my inability to prevent what was unfolding in the room above me. Midway through, I shut my eyes tightly, attempting to block out the sounds. I didn't open them again until the room was filled with the silence that followed their shared climaxes. The silence felt deafening and all-encompassing. Even the normal sounds of breathing seemed absent within the room. I wasn't alone in my turmoil. Glancing at the screen, I saw Flo and Roger quickly separate. The video paused, revealing an empty bed before fading to black. The uncomfortable silence lingered in the room for several tense moments. Once the clip concluded, Mary cast a disgusted look at Flo, while Roger looked hopefully at Alice. Flo stared at a spot on the floor, her focus unwavering. The silence shattered when Alice abruptly rose to her feet, with Roger following suit. "You deceitful traitor!" Alice's words cut through the air, shocking us all. It was the most severe thing I had ever heard her say, surpassing any prior expletives. Roger's expression betrayed his shock at her outburst. The sound of her open palm striking his cheek echoed like a fire shot. She was seething with anger. I've never seen someone so enraged, I thought to myself, watching the scene unfold. But Alice wasn't finished. "Don't you dare touch me, you treacherous little scoundrel," she seethed, her fury palpable. Roger dodged, narrowly avoiding a second slap. He winced, shifting his weight to his right leg, appearing bewildered. "This entire video is fabricated," he insisted. "But why? We had invited Jim and Flo over later that evening, hadn't we? We were planning to relax on the patio, right?" Alice's question came out more like a growl, but due to the rain we opted to stay indoors. "Do you recall now?" Roger still seemed puzzled, but nodded along with Alice's explanation. Alice pointed angrily at the TV screen. "Look at this, fool. The sunlight streaming through the window indicates it's not only a sunny day but also morning. This window doesn't receive direct sunlight until noon. You concocted the entire story, didn't you?" Roger's expression shifted from confusion to horror. That was all the confirmation I needed of their deceit. The abrupt transition from contemplating forgiveness to a resolute decision was disorienting, and I detest feeling humiliated. I could indeed concur that there might be a valid reason for attempting to deceive a lie detector test. There was only one explanation: they tampered with the video. The following moments were tense. Flo let out a loud groan and fled out the door, while Mary sat there, stunned. Alice advanced towards Roger, who attempted to maneuver past me, using me as a shield. I took a single stride and exerted all my force as I brought my foot down on his injured leg. Instinctively, he doubled over, and as his head reached a near-horizontal position, it met my knee coming from the opposite direction, causing his head to snap back, blood spraying from his flattened nose. He joined Flo in a hurried flight away from the house, leaving the three of us locked in a grim tableau. Alice stood trembling, tears streaming down her face, a sentiment I could deeply relate to. For the second time in a week, the man I had loved unconditionally for nearly 25 years shattered my heart. The realization that this was the same person who had kept me hopeful between crises was doubly shocking. Mary remained seated, seemingly stunned by her sister's foolishness and likely horrified by the lies Flo undoubtedly fed her over the past week. I approached Alice and enveloped her in a hug. I held her as she trembled uncontrollably, mourning the demise of her marriage. I've always preferred to grieve in solitude, reserving it for later, but in this moment, I remained composed, as clinically calm as one can be amidst chaos, already formulating a list of inquiries. I was already regretting letting Roger depart with only a broken nose. I glanced at Mary, pondering her reasons for staying. Was it to offer apologies for her role in this debacle, or was it due to her inability to tear her gaze away from the catastrophe unfolding before her? Unable to answer this without breaking my connection with Alice, which I had no intention of doing, I allowed my thoughts to race. It became apparent that Roger, while intelligent and adept at manipulation, was not as cunning as Alice. If she hadn't picked up on the sunlight clue at that moment, we might still be part of two successful couples. In hindsight, the doctored video was quite clever, yet I struggled to reconcile this with the fact that I was being deceived. I was certain that the soundtrack aligned perfectly with the words I had heard during that weekend, leading to an inevitable logical conclusion. That certainty neatly fit into a slot in my mind like the penultimate piece of a puzzle. They must have either overlaid the old soundtrack onto new visual footage or replicated the words and sounds in real time. both scenarios based on recordings made during the original incident. Suddenly, Roger's actions of playing the file through his laptop made sense. After giving Alice one final hug, I gently lowered her onto the couch and made my way to my laptop. I breathed a sigh of relief when I found it hadn't gone into sleep mode yet, which would have required a password to regain access. How silly, I chastised myself inwardly, realizing that if it had, I could have simply viewed the flash drive on another device. My mind was clearly foggy from everything that had transpired. With my fingers deftly navigating the keys and mouse, I closed the software and opened the video file displayed on the Explorer screen, revealing that we had just witnessed myself and Flo making take 8. There were also files labeled 2 through 7. 2 more files caught my attention. One was titled Me and Flo Original, while the other was labeled AED Basement. I clicked on the latter, then scrolled along the progress bar. About 3/4 of the way through, I found myself suspended from that cursed bar in the basement, captured by an obviously hidden camera. I closed the clip, overwhelmed by the flood of unpleasant memories. The file labeled Original was significantly larger than the others. Seeing Alice's approving nod, I pressed play. It revealed a view overlooking Roger and Alice's bedroom. The perspective differed from video 8, prompting me to dash down the hallway to compare the two views. After about half a minute of detective work, I deduced that the original camera was likely concealed on a bookshelf, while subsequent versions were probably captured by a tripod-mounted camera at the foot of the bed. Upon returning to the living room, I noted that the timer at the bottom of the screen displayed 1 minute and 5 seconds, with over an hour remaining. It was evident that Roger lacked editing skills. I fast-forwarded to 20 minutes before the end, then progressed in 30-second intervals until the action began. I backtracked 30 seconds and settled onto the sofa beside Alice, clutching her hand for mutual support. Let's just say the original version differed significantly from the subsequent ones. The only commonality was that it all commenced with Flo pushing Roger onto his back. About 25 seconds later, I heard both Alice and Mary gasp simultaneously. Due to the camera angle, Flo's face came into view as she turned her head to the side, glancing down and to the left of the camera. In simpler terms, there was a grate at floor level that opened into a channel carrying the crucial sounds of their prank to the basement below, where I was held captive. The expression on Flo's face, the one that caused the gasps, was repulsive. My wife knew precisely what I endured in the basement that night, and she relished it. My supposedly loving wife took pleasure in mentally tormenting me. I battled a strong urge to vomit. When Roger noticed where Flo's gaze was fixed on the screen, he smirked maliciously. He seemed too stunned to check the time, but a few seconds must have passed. We all observed as Roger turned Flo onto her back, kneeling beside her and fiddling with his belt and trousers. On the screen, Flo lifted her skirt and ripped off her underwear, tossing them aside. The remainder of the video unfolded pretty much as I had imagined it would during my time in the basement. With the benefit of hindsight, Flo's callous enjoyment of the situation likely emboldened Roger and triggered the subsequent chain of events. That being said, if I were a betting man, I'd wager that this was Roger and Flo's first encounter. The video certainly depicted how what began as a relatively innocent situation swiftly spiraled out of control. I was fairly certain that Roger realized he derived pleasure from witnessing someone else humiliated, but it was probable that Flo stumbled upon her kink that day. After the spectacle concluded, Mary inquired about the prospect of a future between Flo and me. Her demeanor suggested she wasn't hopeful. I paused for at least a minute to sort through my emotions. No, not in this lifetime, Mary. Ironically, if Flo had approached me later and explained that it started as a joke but escalated out of control as it appeared in the original video, then perhaps I would have contemplated forgiveness. However, they colluded to rewrite history and outsmart the lie detector test. This level of deceit is beyond what I ever believed she was capable of. It makes me question how well I truly know her. What else has she lied to me about? Moreover, we haven't yet viewed all the workout videos. After her initial slip-up, she returned and engaged in at least one more physical interaction with Roger. How many times did they engage in such activities during these workout sessions? Then there was the expression on her face. I'm sure you noticed it too, Mary. I'm sorry, Mary, but it's over between us. Mary nodded solemnly. Please refrain from publicly shaming her, Jim. It would only embarrass your children. If you provide me with a copy of the video, I'll calmly explain the situation to Mom, Dad, Flo, and even your children if necessary. I nodded and expressed my gratitude. She departed sadly, but with determination in her expression. Alice had already opened the phone book to the legal section. Alice and I comforted each other for weeks. However, it became evident that any relationship is destined for painful memories. and we parted as friends. I was leaving her house late one night, after once again providing her with comfort, when I encountered an enraged Roger in her front yard. How could he ever hope to reconcile with Alice if I was visiting her 5 times a week? What a deluded fool. Glancing around for potential witnesses, I took great satisfaction in breaking his nose once more. I felt a sense of pride in myself. The memory of that sadistic grin on his face just before he destroyed my marriage would have been provocation enough. In the divorce proceedings, Alice practically crucified him. When he demanded his share of the assets, with my full approval, she threatened to press charges for unlawful restraint, using the basement video as evidence. He cut his losses and vanished soon after. That was for the best. I might have been bluffing. I could have likely endured the public humiliation, and I wasn't concerned about Flo's reputation. But I didn't want to embarrass my children or Flo's extended family. Shortly after I gave Roger a bloody nose, about a week after the video incident, Flo reached out, wondering if my decision not to share the video with her kids, family, and friends indicated a chance for us in the future. Her message, which only included one clip, suggested she was unaware that I had seen the original. She likely assumed Roger wouldn't be so careless as to keep all the incriminating evidence in one place. The message also reminded me that I hadn't sent the clips to Mary. I hadn't heard from my children that week, but given their self-absorption, was that really surprising? This also hinted at a lack of communication between Mary and Flo, perhaps due to Mary's anger or Flo's embarrassment. I called Mary to confirm she still wanted the video. She did. It was during that same conversation that I found out Flo had moved back in with her parents. When I burned both Take 8 and the original onto a DVD, I realized I hadn't actually watched Takes 2 through 7, so I did. In doing so, they extinguished every remaining soft or forgiving part of my heart, turning it into unyielding concrete. To say they both lost control would be an understatement. The same look of disgust appeared on their faces as Flo had in the original version. I almost reconsidered and sent the clips to everyone in Flo's address book before I calmed down and thought about how it would impact my children. I tried to find Roger, but he had already skipped town. No, Flo won't be forgiven, and unfortunately, Roger won't get a third broken nose. I sent all the clips to Mary with a warning that if I heard any complaints about how I treated Flo, I'd release the entire video. She must have done a good job because, one by one, Flo's parents, Eric and Patty, called to tell me they understood why my marriage was over. Later on, I discovered that Mary recounted the entire ordeal to them and offered to show the clips as proof. Only Flo's mother took her up on the offer. Struggling to believe the narrative, she apparently became ill halfway through watching the original clip. Following this, Flo didn't contest the divorce. Through Mary, I found out she had found refuge from the toxic environment at her parents' house by renting a small apartment. I wasn't aiming to cheat her in the divorce. 24 solid years had to count for something, and I didn't want any repercussions from my children down the line if and when they eventually forgave their mother. Flo sent me a sincere letter apologizing for her actions and attempted cover-up. The loneliness she expressed leaped off the pages. She pleaded for forgiveness, but more to reconcile with herself. Her appeals for me to forgive her for the sake of her parents, our children, and mutual friends nearly moved me to tears. Nearly. I wasn't seeking a replacement yet, but there was no shortage of single women vying for my attention. Ask any middle-aged woman about the availability of suitable, decent-looking men with good morals, and she'll paint a bleak picture. I'm looking forward to meeting new ones, and since I have no intention of marrying again, I anticipate many, many such encounters.